The action takes place in a large industrial city along a pond. The street is quite lively. People are walking, children are playing and eating ice cream. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. The hero is walking along the avenue. He receives a message from a girl named Gina. She is interested in where he is at the moment. The guy starts trying to write a reply message with one hand, concentrated on the phone and not at all looking at what is happening around him. Due to his inattention, he runs into another man named John, who is carrying a stuffed paper bag of food, which obscures his entire view. The man tries to look from behind his bag to see what happened. He barely felt the collision. They apologize and each go their separate ways. Hank continues to walk and ends up in the square near the store. He writes to Gina that he is already there. She answers him with a cute picture and puts the hero into ecstasy, which scares the people around him. He has no friends at all. He is a first-year student, and he is happy that he finally has a girl who is not indifferent to him. It turns out that he had been watching Gina from afar for a long time, for example, when she was sitting at a table in a cafe and reading a book. The guy goes to boxing training at a sports club while she works out with a trainer. The girl watches him and actively supports him. They met at this club, where they joined to get in shape, and while achieving their goal, they became friends and began chatting about completely different topics. They exchanged small stories, discussed their favorite movies, games, and music, and finally decided to go on a date, so he went shopping for dinner together. The guy dreamed that after some alcohol, the girl would offer to stay together in the same bed for the night. Dreaming of meeting his beloved, the guy began to make strange, drawn-out moans. The little girl thought he was strange and pointed her finger at him. Hank was still standing in the square in front of the supermarket. People were walking around him, and the shadow of the building sheltered him from the sun. He draws attention to the black tower in the form of a screw. It once appeared out of nowhere, more than 200 meters high, but it was not the only one in the world. Various religious and scientific organizations are studying them, but no one has been able to find out anything, and the tower simply continues to stand motionless. Hank continues to add groceries to the basket. People no longer pay attention to this tower. Their interest lasted no more than 3 weeks. And pretty quickly everyone returned to everyday life. The guy went to the cash register. He took out his wallet and came to the conclusion that he would have to start saving from today. He handed the cashier his card for payment, when suddenly he heard strange sounds, as if someone was speaking in his head, calling people to fight. The process started. Taking the card from the girl, he saw that she began to behave strangely. Her eyes rolled back. Saliva began to come out of her mouth. Her mouth was open. She began to make strange, zombie-like sounds. Then she flew into the air, which left Hank in indescribable shock. He started screaming and asking someone to help her. Then he heard something fall in the hall and saw that another customer began to go through the same process as the cashier. He screamed just as loudly. His head began to spin around unnaturally quickly. His eyes were white and his mouth did not close. Hank was numb with fear, because all the people in the store behaved the same way. The world seemed to stand still for a moment. But then, in an instant, everything passed. The cashier screamed that she was alive. The guy was very scared. She looked at her hands with tears in her eyes. Everyone around them also came out of their stupor. They were glad that they were alive. They hugged each other. The hero did not understand what was happening to them again. Suddenly he felt a blow to his back. He turned around and saw that a man had fallen on him. He was covered in blood, and scissors were sticking out of his head. The cashier was bleeding. She was thanking people for shopping in their store again. She had scissors and a blade in her hands. A Katy girl with 2 ponytails and a pink backpack jumped out of nowhere. She hit the cashier on the head. There was a lot of blood around. She had a huge hand with long fingers and sharp claws. There was blood all over her hand. She looked like a mutant and was happy that she could finally use her essence. Suddenly, Katy was attacked by Cashier Eva with a huge mouth and a super large jaw, screaming for the girl with her hand to give her something, and then crushing her head. People around were in a panic as the cashier used her essence. They began to request the status window to receive her ability. One of them was able to fulfill all the conditions for activating the entity and received frosty breath, and then froze his hand in the form of a huge club. Elvis approached another man who did not yet have the ability. He begged not to kill him and begged for salvation, but the next second his head was crushed by a huge hand. Hank's face was covered in blood. He was very frightened and did not understand at all what was happening around him. Elvis was triumphant in victory. Another unknown guy came out from behind the shelves. He was dressed all in black. His eyes were red. He recognized Hank and shared it with everyone. There was blood all around everything and everyone. People looked back at the guy and tried to find out whether the great king was really standing in front of them or not. Then they decided collectively that since he was next to them, then they could start all over again. But to do this, they needed to kill the guy. One of the crowd took a bottle from the shelf and smashed it in such a way that it turned out to be a weapon with sharp edges. He wanted to finish Hank off with his own hands. Todd came out of the shadows. He was holding sharp knives in his hands. He wanted to kill the guy and take his essence and was extremely determined to do it. Hank sees how fiercely the entire crowd is against him, and how the blades of knives sparkle. He sincerely does not understand why everyone is hunting for him. With a devilish smile and grin, Todd runs towards Hank, holding a sharp, glowing knife in his hands. He tries to attack first. The hero fell to the floor from the blow. A knife landed next to his face. The man missed, but continued to burst into ominous laughter. Hank was completely horrified by what was happening. Todd once again hit the guy in the face with all his might, continuing to call him his prey. It began to dawn on him that they seriously wanted his death, seeing how they were all fully armed with everything that was in the store and at least somehow resembled a weapon. As soon as the main character realized that they were ready to run after him at any moment, he decided to start running away first from the crowd of angry people. Trying to hide from them, he tried to understand how they knew his name, why people continue to kill each other, when suddenly a car runs into him and knocks him down. Todd gets out of the car, continuing to grin evilly. He asks the guy not to run away, but Hank decides that he should still run and save his life. He runs up to a man in a blue jacket. It is John, whom he had previously encountered on the street, who asks him to help, as the killer is chasing him. The man turns around, asks Hank if this is the case. The guy joyfully says his name, but suddenly he sees a bloody axe in his hands. John was very happy with his luck this time. He hopes that the place in the final 9 will be his, but as soon as he begins to swing at the hero, he is hit by an electric shock and falls backward. It turns out that it was Gina who came to the aid of her boyfriend. She had a pistol with a shocker in her hands, and she shot it in the man's back. The girl wanted to know if everything was okay with Hank. He was very lucky. Since she was nearby, parallel to the conversation, she restarted the charge of the shocker and warned the guy that John was still alive and should be careful. The crowd continued to run towards them. The girl shouted that their enemies were still surrounding them, and they needed to run away quickly. Hank didn't understand what she was talking about and why she was calling these strangers enemies, because a minute ago, everything was fine. The girl looked around. All she saw were burning cars and people killing each other. She wanted to know what exactly could seem normal about this. He continued to follow her, when suddenly he stepped on something, and looking at his feet, he saw that it was someone's dead and crushed hand. Nausea immediately came to his throat. Gina asked him to come to his senses because if he continued in the same spirit, then all these people who had changed at once would kill them both. She asked Hank to leave his questions for later. Then she took off her glasses and threw them away, extended her hand to the guy and asked him to leave. He was interested in where she wanted to go, but she confidently stated that they were heading to his home. Meanwhile, the tower was making ticking sounds. Entering the building and hiding in the apartment, they closed the door behind them and could finally breathe out for a while. Hank asked Gina to explain what was happening. The girl's guess was confirmed. She realized that the main character remembers absolutely nothing of what happened in his life before his return. The guy was a little confused when he heard this phrase. He didn't know what it meant. Gina suggested trying to look for a weapon. The girl began to tell a short version of what was happening. Everyone is eager to kill the guy. He is the most attractive target for them. Hank asked her to stop and exclaimed that he was completely harmless to deserve so much hatred. There was no reason to kill him. The girl went to the window. She wanted to check the situation outside. While not letting go of the gun, her boyfriend continued to be nervous, which she did not like. He was not going to relax because just recently a crowd of his potential killers was chasing him, so what kind of peace can we talk about? Gina grabbed his shirt and pulled him close to her. She was angry that he could not understand what was happening, and in a few hours night would come and someone would come to take over the land. The girl continued to hold him by the t-shirt and shouted that he must win the battle, must lead people to kill the damned god. Hank was very scared. He couldn't understand how he had to kill God because he couldn't even win in sparring fights. The whole situation seemed extremely absurd to him. Suddenly, everything around shook. At first, they thought it was an earthquake. Gina assumed that it had already begun, but it was too early in her opinion. The black tower turned green. It rotated very quickly around its axis like a tornado, lifting cars into the air, and the game launch icon appeared before Hank's eyes. Suddenly, the main character fell, screaming in pain. Gina was afraid for him. There was a bright light around, and his body was torn by lightning bolts. His eyes became white. He felt as if his body would be torn into pieces. Lying on the floor, clasping his body with his arms, forced body enhancement was taking place. Immediately after this, Gina also screamed as hard as she could. Her body took an extremely unnatural position, and she was in great pain. In one moment, it was all over. Hank started to have a headache. He rubbed his forehead to ease it. He tried to get up, and the girl was still lying on the floor, unconscious. He approached her, tried to bring her to her senses. The pain disappeared without a trace. They decided that they were lucky, and nothing serious had happened, as Hank noticed that he had grown a little. He felt that a strange power was seething in his hands. He thought that he was seeing hallucinations. He did not understand what kind of blue screen with the status he was seeing before his eyes. Gina hastened to explain that this is a parameter window, and in the future he will get tired of staring there, and his characteristics are still at a basic level. Hank noticed that the girl's appearance had changed slightly. Her proportions had increased. Their bodies had been forcibly enhanced to the limit. While he was examining his new body, the girl saw through the window that the city was completely destroyed, and now there were 2 moons in the sky. They found themselves in a multi-world created by a black tower. With each new rotation of it, another world is superimposed on the earth. Now all the people of this world are going through a return. This means that memories from the future are returning. Ginny also has her memory back. Hank did not understand what kind of future we were talking about. The girl explained that it was different from the future that he imagined, and God provided everyone according to their ability. Abilities are called essence. People can take them away from each other. Thus, they were forced to play a deadly game called enlightenment. It doesn't matter who started it. From that moment, a battle to the death broke out. Many died, and 9 people stood out among the people whose powers surpassed God. They were called the Phenomenal 9. Gina persistently asked the guy to remember before he was nicknamed the Great King, since he was part of the strongest 9. But this was the first time he had heard about it. Hank decided that they wanted to kill him because of the essence. Suddenly the girl bent in half, and then completely flew into the air. She was spinning around herself. Her essence is a flexible body like rubber. Its capabilities go beyond human limits. She can bend both forward and backward. In total, you can get 2 essences. One is given initially. The other is received from the first killed source. He was wondering which essence he got. Gina suggested that he concentrate and see for himself. He discovered the taste of steel beyond the horizon, which he received when killing Casita. Outside their apartment, people continued to fight and continuously kill each other in pursuit of new entities. Suddenly, the tower began to release golden, luminous feathers. A huge egg appeared from the sky. It sank to the ground and something began to emerge from it. Hank and Gina stood on the balcony and tried to figure out who it was that appeared with huge wings in a white robe and with a golden staff in his hands. This Superman slowly landed at the very top of the tower, icy tears flowing from his eyes. He raised his staff above his head, and then a pillar of light rose around the tower. Hank tried to catch the golden feather. He wanted to find out what it was. Finally, the feather fell into his palm, and in an instant, he disappeared. Noticing Hank trying to catch the feather, Gina screamed at him, trying to prevent him from making a mistake, but it was too late. Realizing that he had disappeared without a trace, she sharply opened the door of their apartment and ran out of it with all her strength. She did not expect that enlightenment would begin so soon. She ran along the corridor of the house where Hank lives. She was sure that everything would be fine with him. He was a great king and would cope with the trials. Strange things are happening in the world. Golden feathers are flying around. They explode and open portals of bright light. A man with a blade in his hands laughs. Hank falls from one of these portals onto an unfamiliar land. He is in prostration. His clothes are bloody. He hits his head hard. Looking around, he realizes that he was thrown to the foot of the Black Tower and wonders how this is possible in just a second. Something that looks like golden birds begins to fall from the top of the tower, and people around try to figure out who this angel is and what is happening. One of the angels, David, announced that they were all in a specially isolated zone, and now they would have to pass a difficult test. He sent creatures previously unknown to anyone to Earth and ordered to deal with them first, but they looked quite friendly. One of the participants approached the creatures. He was scared at first, but as soon as he saw that they were very small, he relaxed. He was wondering what kind of isolated zone they could be talking about. The angel looked at him with a withering look and declared that they were underestimating them. Then he made a clicking sound, and the next second, the creatures attacked the man. Winged creatures hovered around the tower and laughed at the stupidity of people. David declared that he was already tired of coddling them. Hank listened to them attentively, but still did not understand what they meant by lisp. Yellow liquid began to fall on people around them. A large amount fell on the man standing next to him. It flowed down his hands. He tried to take it off with disgust, reporting that it smelled disgusting. The monsters began to get out of control. They continued to kill all people standing in their way. They no longer looked friendly. They became huge and intimidating. There were a lot of them, and they were armed, and they were also advancing on Hank and the people standing nearby. David stated that a special pheromone that he just sprayed slightly stimulates the goblins, and those who score the most points for killing them will receive a reward. He announced the start of the battle. The creatures rushed to attack. People began to fight back. The man with a ponytail, Derek, received coins for killing the goblin. One girl shared that her first essence accelerates the growth of plants, and the second allows her to control objects. She was able to grow a huge, cruel plant with her abilities, which pierced several goblins with its branches. She also received coins as a reward. Derek wondered why they called this test the highest difficulty. The bites of these monsters were like tickling for him. He saw that Hank was just standing at a distance, and he was very interested in why he was petrified with fear and called him a disgrace. Before the man had time to finish his sentence, goblins suddenly attacked him from behind. They pierced his body from several sides with their sharp sticks. Another girl participant tried to run away from the monsters, but they caught up with her and grabbed her. She screamed, asking them to let her go, trying to fight back. Another guy, trying to break away from the chase, did not understand what was wrong with them. They did not die, but continued to advance and come to life like zombies. Suddenly, Hank felt someone grab his leg. He turned around and saw a severed body, although his head was still conscious and asking for help. The angels continued to look down on the people fighting with the goblins. David found it funny that the participants called what was happening a test. Hank became very angry at the words he heard. He called it nonsense. He was very upset by the attack of many monsters on one unarmed girl. He decided to protect her, took some kind of stick and began to fight the girl away from the goblins, shouting at them not to approach and to get away. Turning to her to see if she was okay, he asked her to take refuge somewhere, but saw that her body had already been torn apart and she was dead. The angels continued to watch what was happening. They laughed at the people, saying that they had warned them that the test would be difficult and extraordinary. Seeing that the monsters did not die, there were more and more of them. They became stronger and more bloodthirsty. People began to doubt that they even had a chance to survive in this unequal battle. The world around has changed a lot. Huge, sharp rocks came out of the ground, buildings were destroyed, and everything around was overgrown with trees and plants. Hank armed himself with a fire extinguisher and killed the goblins one by hitting them on the head. Then he went down the stairs to the bottom of the city. Hugging the fire extinguisher, he sat down on the ground. The guy was very tired, and he was bothered by the question of how many more of these creatures he had to kill. They didn't die, but new ones appeared in a geometric order. The phone fell out of the hero's pocket. He noticed Gina's photo on the screen. He wanted to find her at all costs. Later, he decided to request the status and noticed that his indicators had changed. He chose durability from his abilities because he wanted to know the details. He could purchase additional points with coins. Hank definitely didn't want to die so early, so he agreed to improve the ability, and then the changes immediately took effect. He heard someone laughing from around the corner. He turned around and met another participant. He looked terrifying and was covered in blood. Russell licked the blood from his face. He wanted to know how Hank was doing, and if he was able to find a good element, because nothing worthwhile dropped from the goblins he killed. Hank realized that this conversation did not bode well for the future, and he was mentally prepared for the attack and was able to fight off the enemy. Then the hero knocked him to the floor and then began to choke him, screaming with excitement and fear, and did not remove his hand from the enemy's throat until he was sure that he was dead. Hank continued to sit on top of Russell's body. The hero tried to understand whether the guy was dead and what would happen to him next, but suddenly he felt a powerful blow from a knife to his shoulder. The enemy laughed with delight. He was glad to outwit the great king. One of his new essences, which he received after the murder, was to pretend to be dead. He pulled the knife out of his shoulder, thus making the wound wider. Blood splashed all around, and Hank began to scream in pain. Russell pinned the guy to the floor and then jumped on him with all his strength. He said that if he really wanted to kill him, then he had to be ready to cut his throat. He explained that the wounds inflicted by his knife would not heal, and if you left everything as it was, you would die from loss of blood, so he would continue to cut until he died. The attacker was sure that the main character also had an unfortunate element in his essence, and he also called him a weakling. Russell continued to beat the poor guy with a knife, repeating like a mantra so that he would die quickly. Hank was already bleeding very heavily. It was even pouring from his mouth. The guy did not want to die in that place. His subconscious forced him to come to his senses, and in the end he was able to fulfill the conditions for activating his essence, the taste of steel. The wild-eyed attacker continued to stab the guy with a knife, when suddenly the knife hit Hank's palm, his ability being able to recognize the object the man was beating him with. Thus, he learned what the blade was made of, and also that the object could be given an order using a command, and in order to absorb the abilities of the object, one had to say the word food. As soon as Hank said the key word, the blade in his hand lit up with a bright flame and engulfed everything around him. The enemy was dumbfounded by what he saw. The wound in his hand began to heal. His pupils began to glow golden. The blood from his nose and mouth, as well as all other wounds, quickly disappeared. The man only had time to see that Hank had fully recovered when he was punched in the face and hit the floor with all his might. The hero had already come to terms with the fact that he would die, and he had no idea how the changes happened. He felt very exhausted after everything. Hank was already picking up his fire extinguisher. Russell was trying to figure out if he was healed right after he ate the element, because then it turns out that he is a great king. The hero didn't quite understand what his opponent was saying, but he understood that he couldn't stop, so he picked up a fire extinguisher and hit the man in the face, knocking out several teeth. He continued to hit the man with his chosen weapon. He hit him furiously and without stopping, breaking his legs and arms with his blows until Russell stopped moving completely. For killing a man, he was given coins as a reward. Hank was very scared, realizing that he had done all this and could not understand why he should give a reward for this. Hank was completely exhausted. His body stopped responding to him. He understood that he would soon pass out and it would be very bad if he stayed there. The activation of the second essence has occurred, super compensation. When after a super strong stimulus, his abilities increase in proportion to the impact of the stimulus. When the hero woke up, it was already dawn. His performance increased greatly. He did not understand why his abilities improved without coins. Suddenly, he heard someone screaming and asking for help. This person begged them to stop because he had just arrived after returning. Hank saw how this helpless guy was enveloped in huge, long chains with sharp, curved tips. They pierced his head and shoulders. Another angel, Michael, appeared at the window. He greeted the hero and asked who he was. He doubted that they had met before. Angel got angry because he thought Hank wanted to sneak away. He doubted the guy had the motivation to do anything. The hero remembered that he had already seen Michael. He was at the tower from the very beginning. When the monsters started killing people, he thought that it all started with him. Hank was furious. He decided to try his chance and ran at the enemy with a fire extinguisher in his hands, but the winged creature easily repelled the attack. Michael laughed at the guy's actions, called him stupid, because he decided to try to attack the angel. He became interested in him. The angel admitted that Hank was not like those whom he usually tortures and kills. Then the guy asked a logical question. Why do they even do this? Michael didn't know what to answer at first, but then he explained that perhaps this was all happening due to the fact that over the past 3 days, the field of education had not moved. Hank was very surprised by his words. He did not understand how so much time could have already passed, how he could have slept for 3 whole days. Then the angel grabbed him by the clothes and pulled the guy with him. He thought it was funny and suggested that since he was netting, it meant he was confident in his abilities. Hank began to struggle and asked to let him go. Michael threw him to the ground. He sympathized with the guy that he had relaxed too much. He dragged him outside to show him something with chains that recently killed a guy in front of Hank. It turned out to be the final boss. Meanwhile, on the street, people began to ask for the next test and hoped that there would be goblins again, because they could earn a lot of coins. David was very happy with such determination, and so he initiated the opening of the gate and summoned the named monster, and invited people to catch the bonus. He was sure that they would appreciate it. The final boss began to unravel his chains. He beheaded and dismembered the bodies of people. He is called the Killer Chichek. Many survivors fled from him. Michael turned to Hank. He invited him to challenge the named monster. If he could kill him, he would receive a whole bunch of coins. But seeing how many dead people were lying on the ground, he guessed that with a conventional approach it would be difficult to stay alive. A new opponent entered the battle with Chichek. He was armed with a large knife. He began to run around the monster at great speed, but was killed almost immediately. The angel applauded the boss's victory. He decided that the opponent had underestimated the monster's dynamic vision, that is, the ability to follow a fast-moving object. Michael and David, sitting on the road sign, advised people to quickly earn coins and increase their status. Otherwise, with this level of ability, they would not be able to swat a fly. People around were indignant, called them bullies. They did not understand how they could earn coins if there were no goblins. David grinned at this reaction. He asked them not to slow down, because you can kill not only goblins to get coins. People began to hunt each other. Everyone began to activate their essences. Hank began to wonder how much he would get if he killed the monster. But you can only find out by winning. Then Hank assumed that if he wanted to escape, they would kill him, and if he did nothing, he would die. So he decided to choose his ending himself. Suddenly, a guy with a claw instead of a hand tried to attack him from behind, but Hank activated the barbed chain, and the enemy was unable to move his body. It turned out that Michael wanted to help Hank and protected him. He didn't want anyone to stop the guy from coming up with a plan to defeat Chichek. As a result, the creature with wings decided to reveal the secret of the reward for killing the boss. The item that would drop from him would give an undeniable advantage in future battles, and he guaranteed it. The angel encouraged the hero. He pushed him to enter the battle and use his chance. He anticipated an interesting fight between them. Hank decided to go at the monster with his bare hands. Everyone around did not understand why he was taking such risks, perhaps that he was so confident in his essence. Michael flew after him. He laughed and was very interested in what the guy's plan was. He shared that the monster had a wide attack radius, and the sickles were not so easy to dodge. Having opened Chichek's talent board, Hank found out that they were equal in physical strength, but the guy had higher strength and speed. He considered that the advantage was on his side. The hero picked up speed, but the monster knocked him down with the first blow, and although he did not hit him, the guy realized that he would not be able to dodge the hook. With the next blow, he had already thrown the guy back, and he hit a pole. He howled in pain. The hook hit the ground and broke the asphalt, pieces of which were thrown at the hero. Hank was not going to give up. He gathered all his strength into his fist and decided to try to jump to hit the monster, but the hook caught him in the shoulder and pierced him. He howled in pain. Then the boss began to wrap the chain around his hand, so he dragged the guy closer and closer to him. The hero could not stop him. The battle continued. Then the monster threw Hank right onto the roof of the car. The guy was already practically unconscious and covered in blood. Witnesses to what was happening looked at everything with a bit of doubt. They did not understand whether the guy had a plan from the beginning. It was felt that he went to fight with only one fighting spirit. Hank was afraid that he was actually dying. His shoulder and leg were pierced with hooks. The monster was pulling him closer and closer to itself, but Hank decided to fight. He pulled the hook from his shoulder, freed himself from the bonds, and then activated the unique skill taste of steel using his code word food. He began to activate. His whole body was on fire. The monster watched this action and did not understand what was happening, when suddenly he struck him in the head with all his strength. The observers realized that he had eaten his element. They noticed that his wound had healed. Hank continued to strike the boss, while screaming heart-rendingly from overexertion. But the monster was not going to give up. He swung and pierced the guy's cheek with his hook, but the hero kicked him in the face, thereby throwing him to the ground. Hank didn't finish his opponent's beating. He broke his shoulder joint, causing an open bone fracture in his arm. The guy continued his offensive movements and beat the monster with all the force of his fist, while the hook continued to stick out in his cheek. Hank went wild. He didn't stop and hit the boss in the head and body until his head was driven deep into the asphalt, and he was completely covered in the enemy's blood. The people around were very surprised by this state of affairs. They recognized Hank as a great king. Only his essence could do this. The guy began to pull the hook out of his cheek, while he tried to activate his skill using a code word. Hank was not happy that the observers recognized him. He did not understand why he met them, and why they knew him, and for what purpose they were trying to kill him. And although the reasons were unknown to him, he advised them all not to approach him. The angel watched him and continued to laugh at his words. But the guy continued his tirade. He warned that if they ignore his words, then they should not expect any mercy from him. People around were discussing whether they really saw Hank, and many, recognizing him, decided to try to kill him, so they could have a chance to become the strongest. Many began to doubt that they had any chance, because he had just killed a monster with his bare hands. Were they his equal? They saw that the great king was still standing motionless over the body of Chichek. He was covered in blood, and around his neck he had hooks wrapped around the chains that he had snatched from him. Michael continued to burst into laughter. He did not expect that the guy would win. He planned to have fun, but Hank took it and finished off the monster. Then the winged monster bent down to the guy and handed him something round and luminous. It was the promised reward, a certain book with a coat of arms. The angel was about to fly away when, in parting, he decided to praise the guy for his intelligence. He called him entertaining and hoped that Hank would be more active in the future. David flew higher, addressing the suffering crowd. He praised them for their good work and also invited them to continue the test. He explained that because they were time synchronized with other areas, they had goblins appearing later, so they sent everyone to a 2-day trial. The three of them, the angels, launched a new process of rotation of the tower. Everyone understood that another superposition of worlds would now occur. There was a crack in the ground. A huge tree came out of it. The whole process was accompanied by an explosion, causing people and cars to fly away, and everyone began to run away. David stated that on the 3rd day of testing they would be waiting for them in the new arena, and also wished them to survive in a special zone. The city increasingly turned into a wilderness. The mountains grew even larger. Now they were taller than the buildings. Hank decided to take refuge in the back of an overturned car. He did not understand how it happened that in just 3 days the world had turned upside down. He realized that Gina was telling the truth. Many died during the tests, and everything that happens is a drama in the guise of a game. He didn't know why he was famous here, and why everyone wanted to kill him. Hank also deduced that his ability was to absorb elements that he touched, so he decided not to attack just for them, but he needed skills to survive. Because all those with whom he has any dealings want to kill him, and all the chaos that is happening does not give him the moral right to surrender to them. The hero began to study the book given to him. It contained the secrets of fist and foot techniques. It was a reward for a special test. After reading it, he would be able to master one of them. As soon as the book was opened, everything around was lit up with a blue flame. He thoughtfully read the text. The words from the book were imprinted all over his skin. His nose began to bleed. He wanted to know what this feeling was. After reading it, he received the extremely powerful foot technique. This technique is based on kicking. He wanted to see if his fitness level was enough to handle it. Having placed the spray paint can on the box, Hank tried to knock it down with his foot, but in the end he missed, fell himself, and the spray can remained standing. He did not understand how to master this technique. The sound of rumbling came from his stomach. The guy was very hungry. He joked that it was the hook's turn to be eaten. After some thought, the hero decided to try to absorb the hook as a new element, and then he received new knowledge, maximizing pain. Hank complained that every time he ate it, there was a terrible stench. Then he decided to eat the rest of the hooks, considering that they were quite suitable as food. The guy continued to complain about the taste, but in exchange for them, he received the 4th level of pain, and all the extra calories were automatically replaced with coins. Realizing how much money he now had, he decided that the taste could be tolerated. He continued to look at his indicators in the table. Looking out of the car, he thought it was quiet on the street and hoped that nothing would happen if he got out, but he was already being watched. It was a new player, unfamiliar to him before. He hit Hank from behind, but the guy was able to land without falling. The stranger stated that he had seen him in action. Having looked at him carefully, the hero realized that he had already met him before. It was Todd. He had previously watched him during the battle with the monster, a guy with a scar on his face. Hank didn't understand how Todd knew him. The player smiled. He was surprised that the guy didn't remember him and called him heartless, intending to strike. The great king fought off the attack with his new knowledge, but the man was surprised that he was using such a useless skill and wondered why he was not using the essence. They continued to fight. Hank mostly fought back and did not attack first, but the enemy fully enjoyed his superiority and took advantage. Todd was disappointed that he did not receive a worthy opponent, deciding that the protagonist's victory over the monsters was pure luck. He teased him, saying that the hero forgot how to fight as soon as he lost his memory, but suddenly Hank was able to activate an extremely powerful foot. The man was still making fun of the king, when suddenly a foot hit him in the face. He thought that Hank had changed his movements, but the guy was already flying at him in a jump to strike again. The activation of the technique was successful. The hero hurried to take advantage of the chance and struck with a new method, a salamander trident. After landing several blows in a row, Hank thought that he had succeeded in defeating his opponent with his new strength, as he lay unconscious on the ground. But suddenly he came to his senses with a scream. The hero did not understand how he survived his attack, but the man admitted that he had an element of a softening blow. Todd also admitted the fact that he would have died without the advantage and praised the enemy for his resourcefulness. But Hank wanted to know the reason for the attack. It is unlikely that he wanted to get new elements. Most likely he wanted his second essence. The man wanted to eliminate him in order to become the strongest, because he received a divine blessing. But at the same time he lost his memory. He could not allow Hank to covet this title again. Todd was confident that he would win this time. They began a new battle, striking each other one after another, Hank using his foot trick. The king then decided to scoop up sand and scatter it around to make his opponent lose track of him, who called him a coward for using dirty methods. Hank continued to methodically strike with the new skill, so he was able to increase its level. With the last blow, the enemy stopped moving. The man was already lying covered in blood. He gathered his last strength to share that he was surprised how Hank could win without a weapon and a powerful element and without memories. Todd, too, at the beginning of the game, received a blessing from those perfect beings interfering in their affairs, but Hank did not remember this. The enemy continued to bleed. While he laughed, he considered the guy a disgrace and that he was no longer quite the great king he had been before. He believed that Hank was not number one and not the strongest of the phenomenal nine, not a legendary warrior who rebelled against God, but just a shell of him. With the last of his strength, he wished the guy to go to hell and shouted that he had no chance in the battle against God, and that next time he himself would become a great king. Hank was very infuriated by the fact that he was the only one of all the participants who did not remember anything at all. Then he covered the body of the murdered man with a jacket. He felt in his jacket pocket a small map with an area circled in red on it. He decided that this was where the god the deceased was talking about was located. Seething with anger, the guy decided that he had to make sure or at least look at the one who was considered a perfect being. Hank went on a reconnaissance hike. He came to a huge waterfall. He knew that there must be a secret place behind it. Going inside a certain temple, where strange figures were carved on the walls, he saw a bright light emanating from the room behind the arch. Once in the huge hall, he noticed a throne at the end of the room. As soon as he asked out loud what was here, a fire instantly lit up in the wall lamps. Hank was frightened by the unexpected bright light. He saw that the figure of a goddess was forged on the throne. He wondered who she was. A female figure with long hair was carved from the stone. 2 dragons with long tails that wrapped around her body towered above her shoulders. Then he received a message from the goddess Cassandra. Her voice sounded in his head. She asked him to choose her religion so that she would guide him. Hank had a feeling that something similar had already happened before in his room. He tried to understand what they were talking about and how a stone statue could speak at all. She introduced herself as Cassandra, the queen of fire of the underworld. She was the creator of this world. The ruler, to whose worship and service he will devote his life, even if he previously followed other gods. She will illuminate him with the flame of mercy and give him strength if he swears allegiance to her. Cassandra ordered him to bow before her, kneel and swear to serve her, but Hank doubted that he could gain power by becoming a believer. He did not want to bow down to the one who suddenly forced everyone to participate in a deadly game that plays with people like chess pieces. The goddess wanted him to lead people to kill the damned god, but Hank did not want her blessing. He was not going to follow the god. Then she pinned him to the ground and, calling him a fool, ordered him to crawl on the floor until he cultivated faith in himself. Hank tried to realize that everything that was happening was the work of the gods. He also began to realize that everyone was fighting because of them and killing each other too, and how, knowing this, he should want to embrace the faith. Then, after investing a lot of effort, he forced himself to his feet and roared that he would never submit to God. Cassandra did not understand why he was rejecting her. She didn't like his words, and she decided to turn from stone into flesh. She was furious, and since he wanted to become a sacrificial lamb, she wanted to take his heart. With one movement of her finger, she began to rip his heart out of his chest. Hank squealed in pain, but then he was able to activate the conditions to activate his essence. She desperately wanted to understand why he didn't want to submit to her, why he didn't want to love God, why he didn't choose her religion. Cassandra was furious that he was mocking her, and for this sin she promised that he would die a painful death by burning in the fires of hell. Hank continued to scream in pain. His essence tried to turn inside him. When the conditions for its activation were met, the goddess's powers were canceled. She didn't understand how it could happen that her power disappeared, but then she was punished for breaking the rule and was stripped of her goddess status. Her body began to collapse. She screamed and asked why this was happening to her. How such a non-entity? How could Hank have a divine essence? The goddess disappeared. Her fountain was destroyed. The angels screamed about danger. They could not believe that this was happening, and that the goddess Cassandra had disappeared. The new world continued to collapse. The mountains fell, and the angels were afraid that the earth would shake and the sky would split, and the power that had lost its owner would flare up and burn the world to the ground. They asked the angel of power how this could happen. He saw on his game ball that part of the earth had collapsed, and although it happened earlier than planned, nothing could be done about it. Then he decided to try to correct the situation by overlaying another world. The tower began to spin again, like everything around it. Michael decided to fly to the new world to check that everything was in order. He made sure that everything was neatly covered up. Seeing a certain crater in the ground, he sensed that that strange boy was somewhere nearby. He assumed that the guy could have died during the explosion. The angel found a sword in the sand. He picked it up and examined it. He wished Hank would hold out a little longer. Then he could survive. He liked the guy, even though he was lazy. Suddenly, Michael felt someone grab his leg. The man was badly burned and unrecognizable. It was Hank. He tried to tell him about it. The creature recognized the guy. He had no doubt about his remarkableness. He watched as he grabbed his artifact and uttered the code word. The hero began to recover. Then the angel decided to request the guy's status. He considered that for someone who survived the explosion, his indicators were too ordinary. The angel tried to find information on the hero. He did not understand whether a mistake had occurred. At this time, Hank fully recovered with even better physical indicators. Michael continued his search through the guy's achievements. Then he noticed that part of the goddess's essence stuck to the hero's hand. but Hank pulled his hand back. The angel stated that Hank had grown, and the stuck part of the spirit saved him, since the goddess quickly weakened and her part of the power became attached to him. Then he gave him a special reward. He also explained that due to the unexpected new overlay of the world, the guy would have a difficult time with his level. Hank was surprised by the reward in the form of an aromatic remedy. Michael confirmed that this is a new test. The action of the cube is limited, and when it expires, they will come and exchange the remaining volume for coins. The angel advised him to carefully put the reward in his pocket so that the smell would not dissipate, but the player did not understand why he needed it at all. Suddenly, a huge pillar of sand flew out of the ground and uninvited guests crawled out, which, according to the entity, were quite expected. A huge worm with teeth and tentacles appeared. It quickly caught the running monsters and swallowed them. The angel wished Hank to have fun. Finally, Gina came into view. The girl in the ruins catches and kills green monsters, but only receives bone knives as an element from them. She holds a purple cube in her hand, just like Hank. She understands that there are other ways to get great items, and the fastest way is to kill people. Suddenly, Gina hears someone talking to her from the destroyed building. The person is surprised that she is still collecting all sorts of rubbish. Frank runs out and, unexpectedly for her, puts his fist under her head. They had already known each other before. The guy noted that Gina had not changed at all. She was not enthusiastic about meeting him, pushing his hand away, asked him to shut up and gave advice to keep his mouth closed if he attacked on the sly. The pumped-up guy didn't understand why she was so serious. He put his arm around her shoulders and noted that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Frank thought that the girl was nervous in Hank's absence. He promised to take care of her if he was with him, and he also invited her to join his party. He raised his upgraded hand and showed off the first-level element he had acquired, a rusty brass knuckle. The girl sarcastically raises her thumb up and then runs it along her throat, hinting at a slit throat. The guy didn't expect her to react like that. He was expecting a warmer welcome. He tensed up so much that even the veins became very tense and were clearly visible through the skin. Frank did not give up and decided that he could take the girl to his team by force. He already raised his hand and swung at the girl. But Gina is not so simple. Her rubber body ability and quick reaction speed helped her avoid the blow, but he was able to miss the swing of her leg into his jaw. The girl moved at the speed of light so quickly that he did not have time to catch her eye. He began to lose patience and joked that this was her way of flirting. She grabbed her arm just above his rusty brass knuckles and then grabbed his body. She wrapped her legs around him and then laid the guy on his shoulder blades. Frank, although he was humiliated by the girl's victory, was still able to find the strength to recognize her as a beauty. But the very next moment, he tried to pull his hand away and strike her. He threatened Gina that if she didn't stop, he would kill her. But the girl was not a timid girl. A couple of moves, and now she had a chance to break the guy's leg. Realizing that he was in a losing situation, Frank apologized, asked her to stop and admitted his guilt, and that he had behaved childishly. The guy with rusty brass knuckles instead of hands decided to offer the girl his elements as his loss, since he did not want to deal with her anymore. Frank extended his hand to Gina as a gesture of goodwill, but she was not going to give up halfway. Her glowing red eyes proved it. She made several lethal blows. Having won the battle, she took her prey in the form of brass knuckles and immediately put them on her fingers. The girl went in search of Hank. Walking out onto the open street, she encountered a white-haired man in an interesting suit. He was surrounded by his comrades. The guy applauded her victory. Gina looked at him with a look full of hatred. She recognized him as an acquaintance named Julian. She wondered if he wanted to have fun. The guy noticed that the heroine was not happy with his appearance. He asked her to soften up, because he didn't come to fight with her. Julian continued to gather his team. She saw his armed henchmen, as well as a truck at their disposal. But Gina did not want to be with them. The man was sure of Hank's death, and if he had been alive, he would have known about it. But he hinted that players with two essences disappear without a trace, and they always need to be ready. He believed that without a memory, a guy would not be able to survive the trials. Although he was once called a great king, at the moment, he is most likely dead. Julian offered the girl cooperation. He considered himself the most suitable candidate for the role of managing humanity. Gina was already ready to destroy everything around with rage, but not wanting to kill the guy, she picked up maximum speed and ran away, making a deep rut of stones and sand behind her. The girl ran wherever her eyes looked. She stopped at the top of a rock and examined the surroundings made of the same rocks and sand. Gina believed that it didn't matter what Hank was before, because the strong should protect the weak, and their past and present were very different. She understood that he did not remember anything about this world and was afraid for his life, but she also felt that she needed to pull herself together and not become limp. The girl could barely hold back her tears. She decided to collect as many elements as possible before meeting her lover, so that it would be easier for them to fight in the future. Gina was about to fight a giant worm with teeth. She had already activated her rusty brass knuckles and rushed straight towards the open mouth of the monster. She felt that the guy was alive and tried to fight for his sake. At that time, Hank climbed to the bottom of a remote cave. He was sitting in an uncomfortable position with his eyes closed, trying to recover from the explosion. Carl was watching him from above. He was holding a large boulder in his hands and was preparing to destroy his opponent. Wanting to kill the guy, he threw a stone directly at the unsuspecting Hank. The hero noticed that some object was flying at him. He suddenly stood up and put his hand under the stone. From the force, it split into many small pieces. Hank looked up and noticed Carl watching him. He didn't expect to be caught in the act, and so he immediately started running away. He immediately hurried to the top, jumping along a steep cliff. Hank finally got to the top, but it was too late. Carl got cold, but he left his clothes and bag, which was good for the hero. Suddenly, hearing someone talking, he decided to see who was walking there. The strangers were discussing the shelter and thought that they had found the ideal place. It was Thor, Diana, and Becca. They were languishing from the heat and wanted to quickly drink water, but their supplies had long since dried up. Thor was indignant because he had the responsibility of carrying everyone's things, and Diana was only responsible for water, but they also ran out of that. To which Becca rightly noted that no one forced him to join their duet, so why does he continue to complain about injustice? The girl began to talk about a portable altar that gives the ability to only the first 3 believers. They decided to cooperate to awaken God and remain together until they find a victim. She told him that since Thor did not trust them, then he should have gone there alone. He was already an adult and should understand that he should be responsible for his words. The guy didn't understand why he had to listen to her reproaches, but at that moment the blonde asked them to shut up. She pulled her long ears out from behind her hair. The guys fell silent, trying to understand what she was up to, but Diana decided to activate her essence, so she found out that someone was watching them. The beauty realized that there was someone nearby. She told the others about it, but unfortunately she could not determine where exactly. She took out a bottle of water and handed it to Becca to drink. Thor was a little offended by the deception. He was told that there was no water left. The girl in the red cape activated her essence. She maximized her sense of smell by using the body's water. Becca tried to smell the observer. It didn't take her long. Even though the smell was unfamiliar to her, she soon pointed to the top of the rock and pointed with her finger. Thor was immediately glad that the victim had found him at just the right time. He decided to go in search of her and ask the girls to prepare the altar. Diana was not sure that he should immediately go to the rock. She decided to try her luck again by activating the search, but failed again. She asked him not to rush, but Thor was not a timid person and did not understand what he should be afraid of. But the next second, Hank jumped out at them and hit the guy on the head. The man did not expect an attack from behind. He hit the ground with all his strength and then missed another fashionable blow from the hero. A purple cube fell out of Hank's pants pocket, a reward for surviving the explosion. He picked it up. The girls immediately recognized him as the Great King. Diana was sure that he had lost his memory. She saw him putting the cube in his back pocket of his pants. She wanted to know if he wanted to take their cube or maybe the coins. The blonde was clearly afraid. She was sweating. The girl understood that there was no point in measuring their strength with him. Becca decided to quickly take the altar out of her bag. Diana wanted to give it to Hank, hoping that then they could be saved. But she did not take out the altar in order to give it to the hero. She was afraid that her friend would give it to him, so she got ahead of events and stuck her knife into Diana's side. The blonde did not expect such an act from her ally. She was bleeding not only from the wound but also from her mouth. She asked to let her go and accused Becca of misunderstanding. But the red coat did not allow the girl to move. She desperately wanted to receive God's blessing, so she finished Diana to death. Hank had no idea what this unexpected meeting would lead to, as he watched as the blonde's head smashed against the altar and her blood flowed down it. The magical altar, having received enough blood from the victim, lit up with a bright purple flame. Becca was not going to give in to anyone. Then the sides of the altar opened and a huge figure in metal armor began to appear from there. It was the god Kent. He wanted to know if the girl was a believer, eager to gain the power of his body. Becca was delighted with the appearance of God. She confirmed his guesses. Then he invited her to rise and climb inside his armor. She was very happy, but she was immediately warned that not all activation conditions had been met. Kent was disappointed by the girl's weakness. He released iron spikes and demanded that she give up her flesh and blood to become his food. Becca tried to get out of the iron trap. She didn't want to become someone's food, because she had already given the victim's blood and did not know that there were still some hidden conditions. The thorns were compressing more and more. They had already begun to pierce her skin. The girl was screaming for help. She asked Hank to save her. But before the guy had time to come to his senses, the girl's body burst inside the god's suit. Then Hank decided to open the board of the enemy's capabilities, but most of them were unknown. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the angel Michael appeared. He looked at the god's skill table and assumed that the guy was finished. Hank understood that his chances of winning were less and less. Kent's battle armor was waving his weapon and jewelry, ready to pierce anyone with it. Michael was ecstatic in anticipation of a spectacular battle. He noted that unlike Sichek, Kent is a type of fighting technique that has impartial attacks and a complete lack of intelligence. The guy already had his fists ready. He didn't like the angel's attitude, which he was trying to infect Hank with. He asked him to either help or shut up. The winged creature continued to grin at the hero, but in the end he decided to help. He wanted to check on the cube how many the hero had killed. Michael continued to call people inferior creatures, ready to kill each other for profit, while Hank noticed another cube lying next to Diana's body. The guy rushed as hard as he could for the cube, discouraging the angel. He had 5 seconds left before the end of the cube's action, and dodging the god's blows, he managed to grab it at the last moment. The angel raised the old cube above his head, noting the speed of the main character. He had almost lost hope for the guy. Hank was still ready, still holding his hands in fists. He didn't understand why Michael liked watching him fight for a living so much. He opened the cube display and found out that he ranks first in the area where he is located, and the volume is astronomically large, and he also received a bonus as a reward. But the hero understood that he was faced with a more difficult task, namely to defeat another god. Their strengths were unequal, so the guy decided to spend coins on improving his abilities and body. The battle began in an instant. The battle armor made the move first, Hank deflecting the blows until he activated his super strong foot. Unfortunately, the armor was very strong, and his blows did not have much effect on Kent, although the attack worked with a bang. Even the super strong attack of the first-level Salamander's trident did not harm the god in any way. Only faint smoke from the fire was noticeable, but the metal did not burn. But the armor was not going to give up. He grabbed Hank and threw him to the ground, then swung his sword hand, but the guy dodged. Then the hero grabbed his hand and activated his essence of the taste of steel. As soon as he uttered the code word, he was able to tear off his opponent's hand, from which a liquid like blood flowed. Hank didn't understand how it happened that the severed arm was considered a new element of his abilities, because last time it was different. Delighted by this development of the situation, he decided to invest all the remaining coins in upgrading his abilities and hoped that he would be able to touch the armor again. But the guy had a worthy opponent. He continued to swing his sword and Hank tried to dodge them, noticing that the attack radius had become larger. He understood that now it would be much more difficult to close the distance. He tried to move actively, but God was much faster, and at one moment the blade cut off the guy's hand. Michael watched the battle and was very impressed with how they fought. Although Hank was able to cut off the god's hand, he could easily win without it. The guy was already very exhausted, plus the pain from the cut-off arm caused inconvenience in the test. Hank believed that the person had very little chance of success. The angel watched them from above. He was suddenly joined by David, who was surprised to see the battle armor. He believed that he could not be defeated. Raphael also joined them. They invited Michael to stop watching this battle and join them. They were able to find an amazing fighter. This new player was able to obtain a piece of armor that protects his arm, and he also leads the rankings in terms of kills. But Michael was completely uninterested in listening to their beliefs, but he wished them to have fun, but he himself refused. The other angels were shocked by what they heard. He continued to watch Hank's battle against God. He managed to become attached to the guy and wanted to see his death with his own eyes. Hank, meanwhile, stood and held onto his wound. Blood continued to flow from his arm. He was very tense and could not normally fight off Kent's attacks, but only dodge them. The hero understood that he could not win while so much blood was flowing out of him. He longed to be healed with his essence as quickly as possible. Having accidentally felt an object in the sand, he touched it and was able to find out that it was an ancient bracelet, but it was not enough for treatment. Something more significant was required. It took incredible work for the guy to implement his plan. He picked up speed to confuse the enemy. He held the bracelet in his teeth and grabbed his severed hand. But Hank did not foresee that the god himself was very fast, and in an instant he found himself behind the guy's back and, with a slight movement of his ball, cut off his other hand. The plan could still be prevented from happening. Even with his hands cut off, he would call the monster and wait for it to step on his flesh so he could say the code word for activation. As soon as he said it, there was an explosion of light, and Hank's hand immediately fell back, and the god's leg was destroyed. Hank decided to catch the enemy's moment of weakness. He quickly touched his armor with both hands. The guy was confident of his victory. Since his ability is to absorb elements that he touches with his hand, thanks to the bracelet, he was able to heal the wound on his cheek, but he was not going to stop and wanted to completely absorb all of Kent's flesh. The guy held the god's sword with one hand and his head with the other. He shouted the code word, and the armor in these places began to slowly split into atoms until they disappeared completely. Michael, who was watching the action taking place, was amazed at the hero's talent. He doubted that Hank would be able to defeat such a strong opponent. The remaining metal part of the god fell to the ground, and a body appeared from the destroyed head. Everything around was covered in his blood. Kent's essence made contact with the guy. He showed favor and continued to repeat very well right inside Hank's head, who did not understand whose voice it was. Suddenly, the battle armor suddenly jumped up and suddenly attacked the hero again. Hank was able to grab onto his remaining limbs. The guy decided not to be so kind anymore and said that then he would eat God entirely to the last cell. But as soon as he said the code word, what happened was not what he expected. His ability did not work, as divine power negated the effect of the essence and the item that softened the blows. Despite this unfortunate situation for him, Hank still did not give up and continued to strike, tearing off the god's second leg, and then beheading him. Making a strange hissing sound, the essence of God began to crawl out of the pool of blood. It was a girl in a red dress and with a terrifying smile. She smiled, admired the guy's abilities, and said that the last attack was very painful for her. Then she snapped her fingers. Overnight, Hank could no longer move. It was obvious that these were the tricks of the second essence of the battle armor. The deity demanded the guy to bow before him. The deity demanded to swear allegiance, as well as give him the body and soul of the guy, and also demanded to love him. The message limit was exceeded, and sending messages became temporarily unavailable. It turned out that it was Michael who forbade her to send messages to Hank. As soon as she realized that he was to blame for this, she hurt him and demanded that he not interfere with her. The angel could not cope with her strength and began to fall to the ground. He hit hard, but the girl continued to mock him, promising to break his back. Michael continued to lie there, unable to move. He begged her for mercy, and also tried to convince her that it was not him, but the decision of the system. Hank decided to turn her attention to himself. He asked if she wanted to talk, and as soon as she fixed her gaze on him, he realized that she understood him, and she was not dumb at all. Kent released the angel and then asked the guy to play with her. Hank didn't understand what she was talking about. He didn't expect such an answer. God declared that she really liked the hero. She flew very close to him and lifted his chin with her finger. Michael was trying to catch his breath after the unexpected attack of the battle armor entity. He was surprised that she liked the guy and suggested that perhaps she was thinking of replacing the apostle. She promised that Hank would become stronger, not like the others, and if her sympathy was mutual, then she could give him the ability to destroy this entire world. Michael found an opportunity to fly up. He could not understand that such a monster as Kent could be called from above. He tried to quickly report this to the Angel of Power. The entity heard the angel's thoughts, and using her powers, she again threw him to the ground. He was bleeding from his mouth. The girl ordered him not to rock the boat. She then turned her attention back to Hank. She assumed that he would be better than the current apostle and would be able to amuse him. The guy said that he did not want this. Then she smiled at him, not believing his words. She asked him again if she had heard that he did not want to become an apostle. She stated that she did not believe the words of a god like him. Michael was still pinned to the ground. He did not understand why the guy was refusing such an offer. Then the entity flew up again. It had already begun to gather a ball of its power in its hand and was preparing to kill the main character. Hank told her that the goddess Cassandra also promised to grant him powers if he bowed to her. He didn't want to hear that nonsense anymore. He felt anger towards such gods, perhaps due to the fact that he had killed one of them in a past life, but he knew that she could not kill him due to the rules of the system. Continuing to speak, he called the girl impudent and spoiled, and he was not going to devote his life to such a frivolous creature like her. Hank said that he did not accept Kent as a god. Then she flew up to him again and took his head in her hands from above, again repeating her sympathy. Then she looked at him upside down, eye to eye, her eyes glowing with a yellow light. She wanted to make him her property. The girl sat on top of Hank's shoulders, wrapping her legs around his neck. She kept her fingers at his temples, applying pressure, and a shiver ran through him. She knew that God should not interfere with the affairs of non-believers and those who do not pray to him. But before the system made a decision, it could invade his mind, or his head could simply burst. The battle armor continued to burst into laughter. She was amused by the fact that the guy was shaking like a leaf, threatening that he would stop breathing. Kent wanted to know if he thought she was terrible, squeezing him so that he could not twitch. The girl believed that only an idiot would be rude and refuse her. She let go of his head but left a stigma on his face. The kiss of the god of war, a sign of a true god. With her, he would never be able to forget about her. Having finished her work and deciding to leave, her body began to become covered with large spherical ulcers. She did not say goodbye. Then the entity's work exploded and covered everything around with blood. The guy was finally able to exhale. He could barely stand, covered in blood after the explosion of his body. Hank was glad that she freed him from being captured. Michael was still lying on the ground, slowly beginning to come to his senses after the weakening of the god's spell. He was glad that the danger had passed, and he was now free. The hero approached the remaining armor. He tried to absorb their power, but the system generated an error, but he had no doubt that he would not be able to eat them. Since everything turned out this way, Hank decided to look at the status table and deal with the reward in the form of a ticket with a chest, ordering the item to be given out. The angel was finally able to get to his feet. He regretted that he had started all this. The hero called out to him and declared that he had already saved his life twice. Hank hinted that it would be nice to pay for the service rendered, showing him the ticket with the chest. The lionfish creature was clearly not happy with the blackmail. He flew up over the guy and yelled that this was not funny at all. No lower creature would even dream of wanting to devour an angel. The hero was a little deaf from such loud screams, so he decided to hit the angel in the side, and he curled up on the ground in pain. Hank returned to the ticket. He wanted to rip it to activate it, but wasn't sure if it would work. But right after tearing it, a bright blue light appeared. A certain person began to appear from the emerging whirlwind of light. It was a middle-aged man, with a mustache and in a strange robe of a wanderer, with a huge backpack on his back. Fletcher tried to see where his client was. Noticing Hank, covered in blood, he asked how he was feeling. The guy could barely stand on his feet. Then the man handed the hero a small vessel and, apologizing, invited him to use it. The wineskin contained a lot of water, although it was light in weight. Hank immediately opened the bottle and without hesitation began to shower. He happily washed off the blood, sweat, and dirt, and was then able to breathe a sigh of relief. In the meantime, Fletcher decided to unfold his backpack. It contained a rack with a huge number of different bladed weapons. The man greeted the client again. He is a peddler who travels the world and offers only first-class goods. He hugged the hero, suggesting that he first look around a little while he rested a little after the journey. Hank approached the stand and was a little surprised at the cost of some of the goods. Fletcher asked if it was his first time using the seller's service. Having heard a positive answer, he decided to tell the guy about the ticket he used, which allows him to call a representative of the trading company at any time. The ticket is not so easy to get. He offered Hank to buy a ticket at a special price of 500 coins, but to the surprised face of the guy, he decided to bargain to 200. The hero checked his balance of coins. He had more than 40,000 in his account, and he honestly told Fletcher about this. The man was very shocked to hear that the guy had no money. He lamented that recently there had been very tough competition between the shops. After so much time, he hoped that a worthy client had finally appeared, but he was called just to look and not buy anything. Hank didn't understand why the merchant was reacting this way. He had money, but Fletcher laughed. He didn't care. For him, the guy was a beggar. The guy did not expect that. Having torn the ticket, an arms dealer would come to him. It turned out that he really used the call for nothing. The seller really wanted to know how Hank got this ticket in the first place, and learned that he was given it as a special reward for the cube test. Once Fletcher learned the truth, he realized that he should have guessed earlier, because the guy didn't even know what the ticket was for. Hank made the excuse that he had been called into a world where enlightenment had just begun, and the salesman was surprised that he did not read about precautions before using something. The guy admitted that he's not one of those people who gets acquainted with such things, and it turned out that he didn't even know what Fletcher was selling. It turned out that the man was selling various items from second class and higher. He assured the guy of the excellent quality of his goods, so the client must be corresponding. He complained that because of this call, an important deal had fallen through and he could not remain calm. The merchant began to collect his things. Hank decided to take out the weathercock and drink some water, but Fletcher was completely disappointed with such a client and demanded to return it, since it was not a gift. The hero was also upset that the reward turned out to be useless for him. In anger, he kicked the armor of the god, which remained lying on the sand. The merchant immediately noticed this artifact. His eyes lit up with an urgent desire to get the valuable metal. Fletcher expressed curiosity about how exactly Hank plans to dispose of this piece of garbage. The guy honestly answered that he was not sure, since the essence could not be used on him. The man tried, under the pretext of harming the environment, to ask for his armor to be disposed of, but the guy refused. Then he immediately changed his behavior, immediately apologized to the hero for his discourtesy, and then offered to ransom them at a high price. He offered the guy 200,000 coins and 2 tickets to challenge his junior colleagues and a big discount if he bought something from them. Seeing that Hank did not yet agree to the sale, he said that he would not let the guy go anywhere until he sold them to him. Then he offered to exchange them for his goods. He offered different goods, one more expensive than the other: a beautiful blade with a blue glow, brass knuckles with a sharp blade, or gloves with protection. Fletcher had a burning desire to make the exchange as quickly as possible, but the guy, sensing deception, decided to start bargaining with 1,000,000 coins. The man was very upset when he heard such a large amount. He was unhappy that the guy took him for a stranger in order to extort him at exorbitant prices. Suddenly, an angel flew out of nowhere. The merchant was very frightened by his appearance, but Hank was unhappy that he visited him again. Michael called the hero a moron. He confronted him for his words about saving his life, but the guy was unshakable. The winged creature wanted to bring down all his anger on them, but Hank grinned at the fact that the angel could not accept the truth, could not raise his head in the presence of God, and now wants revenge. He didn't like the guy's words, and then he decided to hit the guy behind whose back the merchant was hiding. A ring of flame formed around them. But Michael decided not to bring everything to sin, so his hand stopped next to the guy's face. He warned that next time he would not spare him for such words. The angel had never been so angry before. He warned the guy once again that even this armor would not be able to save him next time, and then flew away. Hank wasn't entirely sure why the creature mentioned armor, but he decided to try it on, even though he was sure it was women's. Simply by leaning the metal against his naked body, they immediately began to transform according to his figure, quickly taking on the desired size. The merchant was very upset when he realized that he would not get the rare element. and then noticed that his entire shop was destroyed. Fletcher cried, realizing that all his goods had turned into trash. Holding a broken staff in his hands, he realized that now he could not sell all these things. Hank noticed some kind of green package that looked like a mattress, and although he didn't know what he needed it for, he offered to buy it cheap. The seller tried to control himself, but he decided that the guy had teamed up with an angel to rob him. He thought that in this way, he would go broke. Fletcher agreed to give the guy a mattress at a discount, but the hero bargained and, in addition, begged for more clothes, water, and food. Having tried on the outfit, the guy was not particularly delighted, and the merchant, having already opened the portal for movement, threw parting curses in his direction. The main character sincerely did not understand how one could be a merchant with such a disgusting attitude towards clients. He picked up a fallen ticket to call another seller, took his newly acquired things and got ready for the road, but drew attention to Diana's lying body. Deciding to stay a little longer, he buried the bodies in graves and covered them with stones, marking the burial sites with sticks. Since it was already deep night outside, Hank remained in the cave. He lit a candle and began to look at the mattress he had bought in a package, but there were no instructions for it. After unpacking the product, which looked like a regular sleeping bag, he learned that it was damaged and most of its functions were unusable. Hank was already falling asleep while sitting, so he decided to wrap himself in a sleeping bag, when suddenly he was awakened by someone's voice, noting the guy's tired appearance. He was afraid that God had contacted them again, so he could not sleep. But it was Sonia. She promised to calm his body and mind. Meanwhile, in another place, the same player with the armor protecting his hand was killing everyone. He created a whole massacre and waited for the Great King to appear in front of him. Hank slept soundly in his sleeping bag, opening his eyes. He did not understand where he was. He fell asleep in a cave and woke up already in the room. Michael was sitting opposite him. It was he who moved the guy to a new place. The 8th day of enlightenment was already underway. Then he called him to follow him. Going outside, the hero heard some noise. The angel explained that these were the sounds of the game. While he was sleeping, the tournament between the zones had already begun to come to an end. He also said that the winner will receive an excellent fence, but if he is afraid of dying, then he can refuse to participate. Approaching the arena where Kurt stood, he had already managed to kill everyone who agreed to fight with him. The rest retreated. The only one remaining was Hank. So the final battle could have been between them, but the hero was dumbfounded by the cruelty of the participant. He waved his huge, customized hand, destroying everything in his path. Kurt was eager to fight the Great King. He invited him to join the fight. He wanted to prove his strength and abilities by killing the guy. Hank decided to stretch his muscles a little. While simultaneously requesting status, he spent coins to improve his strength and physical strength. Michael was surprised that the guy was not scared, but he was afraid and did not want to give up, deciding that it was better to die in battle. The hero went up to the arena. The two of them remained there. The spectators took their seats. Kurt believed that Hank's very existence was an obstacle for him to become the new Great King. But the main character did not understand everyone's thirst to become a king. Why in the new crazy world they only want to get this title? Because by collaborating, they could return to their world. The man interpreted these words in his own way. He decided that the guy had become a coward, and in this world strength is the main thing. The law of natural selection operates here. Kurt activated his essence, gravitational pressure, and tried to destroy the stage. Hank barely managed to jump so as not to be hit. The hero assumed that his essence had distorted the earth, but the man raised his hand up and used his super strength. It consisted in the ability to attract any objects, including people. Hank could not resist this. He obediently flew towards him. Touching Kurt's huge hand, the guy tried to hit the salamander with his signature trident, but he parried it with his right hand. Hank tried to kick him again, but his opponent grabbed him on the foot and threw him with all his might into the fence around the arena. The mad participant was seriously angry. He turned on the full power of his essence and began to destroy the arena. People began to scream. They all flew towards the player, and he caught them and crushed them with his huge hand. Kurt was furious that all the people were interfering with him. He drove them away and pushed them away. Many died from one of his blows, but he was looking for Hank, who jumped out at him. The guy was able to strike the madman in the face, sending him into a rage. He accelerated and was already preparing to deal a fatal blow to the hero. But he was ready, and dodging under the arm, he delivered another powerful kick to his jaw, knocking out several teeth. God of War Mark was disappointed by the powerlessness of Kurt, who believed in him. He wanted to leave him, but the guy resisted as best he could. Hank was very happy that he was finally able to find the player's weak spot and managed to break through it. He did not doubt his abilities. But the next moment, he missed a powerful blow. The guy sprayed blood from his mouth. The God of War was still disappointed with Kurt. Lightning flashed in the sky. Then a column of light hit the center of the arena right at the madman. Hank did not understand what was happening. The man continued to beg God to give him another chance, but Mark was adamant. He initiated the transfer of the soul into the body of the believer. God was transferred into Kurt's hand. An eye and a mouth appeared on his palm. He claimed that the man was not good enough even with his blessing. Hank was still looking at the animated palm, which expressed a desire to personally crush the guy, offering to take it as an honor. The hero was very dissatisfied that yet another deity appeared before him, descending from heaven and breaking the rules. Michael watched what was happening all this time. He himself did not understand how God, who forced people to participate in education, had the right to intervene directly in the battle. Mark stated that God is free to use the body of a believer who kneels before him at his discretion, and he also noticed the mark of the god Kent on his cheek. The creature struck the hero again, causing blood to spray from his mouth again. Then he forcefully threw the guy to the ground. Mark couldn't call his supporter to lose to someone like Hank, so she jumped on top of the guy and slammed him into the asphalt. Suddenly, his huge hand split into many ribbons. It was almost impossible to escape their blows. The hero continued to receive blow after blow. After dozens of attacks, he nailed the guy deep into the ground. He was barely alive, bleeding. Mark laughed that a young man with such pathetic abilities dared to challenge him. But the great hero was still conscious. Although he felt extremely bad, he replied that he was curious to measure his strength with God, but he turned out to be weak because he was still alive. The talking palm lifted Hank's head. He realized the reason why Kent chose him. Perhaps it was a better body. He offered the guy a deal. He would give him a chance to survive if he cut off the symbol of battle armor from his cheek, and then bow before him and receive all the power of his body. Hank was already very tired of hearing the same nonsense from the gods about faith and worship. He did not see any point in blessing them. Advising the gods not to look down on people, he only angered Mark more. He heard mockery of himself in his words, so he decided to crush the guy with the strength of his body. When suddenly the hand rested on the fist of a madman, it was Kent in female form. She did not allow the god of war to touch her marked one. She lifted Hank's head and kissed him on the lips, thereby not only healing him but also awakening his powers. Her power flew into his mouth. Battle Armor called this guy her special baby because she likes him, and the hero has changed a lot. He began to look as crazy as she does. The god of war became very angry at her interference, but she put him in his place, saying that he was the one who got into the human fight in the first place. Kent, in the guise of Hank, slowly grabbed the arms of Mark's body, wondering why the battle armor had modified the body of its believer so much. He was angry at such a question. He did not need moral guidance from her, because she herself had forcibly captured a person who did not believe her. Then Hank suddenly grabbed Kurt's hand and kicked him several times. He wanted the maddened god to calm down a little this way. But he was not at all going to give up and miss his chance to harm his enemy. Despite the fact that he only had an arm, he continued to stand. God wanted to make Kent cry, but he challenged him, then decided that he needed to even their chances, since he had completely taken over Kurt's body. The deity infused the spirit of a puppeteer into the hero, and then began to use a crazy martial arts dance in battle with the enemy. After several excellent attacks, Hank was able to lay the guy's body on the ground. God was confident that he had defeated the enemy, and placing his foot on his head, triumphed. Although Kurt looked defeated, the god of war had not yet disappeared. He rose up again and attacked the hero, but he was able to deflect the blows, and then completely tore his arm from his body and threw it far away. The angel, as always, flew at a distance and watched the struggle of the two gods who had inhabited people. He considered them to be narrow-minded madmen. He was curious why they arranged all this right now. Hank noticed the watching winged creatures and headed towards them, which made the angels very nervous. God was tired of their rules. He wanted to keep the guy's body for himself. He grabbed Michael by the face, not giving him a chance to answer, and kept saying how he wanted to crush them all at once. He wanted to know why exactly he was constantly hanging around the hero. Kurt was going to leave before Hank woke up. He asked the angel to take care of his pet and also protect him from anyone who wanted to attack. The deity turned and looked towards the tower. He turned to the angel of power, who in his opinion saw nothing beyond his rules. The hero's body tried to expel the evil spirits from itself. God realized that time was up and he could no longer hold out in it, also noting that the guy had excellent willpower. Michael was happy, as were the rest of the angels. They all exhaled that Kent was gone. He wondered why he was the only one who suffered every time. Hank was lying on the ground. He was in pain. Every cell of his body was convulsing. After the battle, the guy unlocked new secret fighting techniques. The angel suggested that due to the fact that the hero against his will activated the divine technique without having a sufficient level of ability, all his muscles were torn. He lay on the ground, completely unconscious, his entire body covered in blood and bruises, while the people around him wondered if they could kill him. But they heard that the deity ordered Michael to protect the guy. He continued to stand over his body and waited for him to finally wake up after everything that had happened. David placed his angelic body on a pedestal. He solemnly announced the end of the tournament, as well as the completion of tests for all zones. But from that moment the game began. He advised not to lose vigilance and wished everyone to cope with the next test. Raphael flew up to Michael, who was still standing next to the main character. He asked him about his future plans, offering to just leave the guy here and fly away. But the defender sent his colleague away. He would not be in the mood to talk to him. He wanted to stay and watch Hank until he woke up. He woke up in his sleeping bag. Everything still hurt, and the recent incidents made themselves felt immediately. The angel was happy about the hero's awakening. At that very second, the winged creature yelled at the guy for sleeping for a very long time, and forcing him to get up. Hank thought that he had lost consciousness only for a moment. He wanted to know where all his things were, but Michael didn't bother to take them with him. The angel complained that he had wasted several days looking after him. It turned out that he slept for 4 days, during which time the world was rebuilt, and this is no longer the place where the guy was previously tested. There were no more boundaries dividing the world into 2 areas. Hank did not understand what boundaries we were talking about. They were on top of a new cliff. All people with 2 essences, as well as those who were excessively cruel during the Enlightenment, were distributed according to their strengths into different groups and began to fight with each other. The sorting was almost completed. The new test was ready and already waiting for the participants. There was half an hour left before the start. Michael reproached the guy for sleeping for a long time, but Hank believed that it even turned out better. Otherwise, what would he have been doing all this time? The angel believed that the guy had already completely lost his conscience. Then he decided to give him a reward for his previous victory in the battle with God. Feathers were falling from the sky again. Hank decided to check his status. He noticed that all indicators had increased, compared to the time when his abilities were weaker. Now even his body had become lighter. After looking at the reward he received, he learned that this compass points to a person with similar abilities or desires as the owner, but there has been no reaction yet. The guy began to think about the question of his desires. Before he was interested in money, career, and popularity. Now none of this mattered. He wants to meet Gina. Hank stood on the very edge of the cliff. He remembered his girlfriend, but soon forced himself to stop reflecting. He had to move forward. He decided not to retreat one step. Despite any obstacles and whatever the main test, he was ready for anything. Activating his new divine technique, the extremely powerful foot, he descended the cliff in short leaps until he landed neatly below. The guy was glad to feel the full power of his physical abilities. He never ceased to be amazed at such incredible changes. Checking the compass again, which was not responding at all, Hank considered whether he should go to the Black Tower. He could lose his way and get lost, so he hoped to find animal trails or traces of other people. Hank continued to walk down the mountains. He noticed a small hole in the ground that was a different color from the sand. He suggested that it might be the track of an animal, But as soon as he approached her, a giant crab jumped out of the hole. At first they froze, waiting for a reaction from each other, but after a moment the crab chased after the guy, who was running as fast as he could, but they had a serious difference in size and number of legs. The guy decided to try to turn behind a rock and hide behind it, but the huge animal simply destroyed the hero's shelter, which greatly frightened him. Hank didn't understand. How could he deal with the crab? It's not an element, so all he could do was run and hide. At some point, the great king decided that the arthropod had decided to give up the search and left, but its shell was still sticking out of the hole into the ground. It seemed to him that this crab was too large for one of its species, so he decided to avoid strange-colored stones. As soon as the guy exhaled from the recent danger, he was suddenly grabbed by the claws of a huge red bird, similar to an exotic parrot. He wanted to eat them, but unfortunately this was impossible for his abilities, so he had to use a kick to get the bird to free him. But as soon as the parrot released Hank off the ground, his leg was immediately grabbed by the tongue of a huge lizard, and with its long tongue it lifted the guy into the air. He was tired of getting into such troubles. He became very angry and hit the animal with his powerful kick, thereby killing it. Hank didn't understand why the current world belonged to monsters. He had to kill a crab, a bird, and a lizard to save himself, but he couldn't get any elements from them. After checking the compass, which was still inactive, he tried to figure out where to go next. This feeling of being lost terrified him. The guy decided to take a short rest next to him. His shoulder hurt. He was constantly rubbing it, and besides, he was confused by the new world. Hank's stigma suddenly flared up. Kent decided to give him an excellent means of restoring strength, taking which he could immediately renew his energy. He took a closer look at the contents of the jar and noticed little faces there. The guy decided to throw the bottle away and declared that he was no longer talking to him. Hank lay in the sun and thought about how his past life seemed like some kind of distant mirage. He couldn't believe that his still daily duties would become routine. The guy held on with his last moral strength. He stood up and shouted loudly. He wanted the old world to return as quickly as possible. With his screams, he woke up the dozing crab. Hank was scared when he saw him coming around the corner, but in the end, everything worked out. When suddenly a dull thud began to be heard from his pocket, he took out his compass, which finally found its direction. Hank decided that this was a reaction to his desire, and that perhaps what he wanted was at the end of the beam. The hero descended from the next mountain. He followed the directions of the compass, and the countdown to the start of the main test began. A couple of minutes remained. Suddenly he noticed that several people were standing in one of the caves. He assumed that they were all from the same team. Hiding, he decided to eavesdrop on their conversations. One of them warned his fellow tribesmen about the danger of entering the cave, since everyone who tried earlier was already dead. But before he could finish speaking, he was hit in the face with a bat. Warren asked him not to point fingers at him. He considered them useless people, and also that they were alive thanks to Gina's acquaintance, Julian. They continued to stand in front of the entrance to a huge, dark cave and argued about whether they should go inside for the most valuable element. Time was running out for them. The man with the bat held it next to the other man's face. He was sure that he and his essence would be able to get out when the test began, but he was not sure about the others. Deciding to leave one person on guard, they gave him something similar to a walkie-talkie and asked him to report from time to time on what was happening. The rest moved inside the cave. Warren felt that someone was watching them. He asked the man not to hide. Hank came out of the bushes. He stated that he was not going to fight. As soon as the man saw the guy, he immediately recognized him as a great king. He was glad that the hero survived the test and did not expect to meet him in such a place. But in fact, he was glad to have the opportunity to attack and kill Hank, immediately throwing a punch towards the guy, but he was able to dodge. Warren continued to attack. He admitted that he also survived, and his memories were still with him. Hitting the hero, he was pleased. Hank saw an opportunity to grab onto the enemy's metal bat. He wanted to eat it using the code word, but his idea was not successful, since the man knew about another entity. The hero then decided to use his ability to kick, but Warren beat him to it, using his spider leg's essence, and he was able to climb onto Hank's leg. Then the main character missed another blow. He was forced to spit out the accumulated blood in his mouth. The enemy explained that his essence allows him to walk anywhere, even on the water surface. There was less and less time left before the start of the test, the counter urged the man. He tried to finish things with the king as quickly as possible. Warren accelerated around Hank, deciding to use the method of striking from the shadows, but the guy managed to grab his hand and did not let go. He tried to escape from the tenacious trap, continuing to strike the hero's face, but he did not let go of the grip. There were only a few seconds left before the test. The countdown was completed, the commandment was activated, the ban on the desert ecosystem was completely lifted, and the locked objects were released. The enemy warned that they should run away from here, but immediately after these words, a shadow appeared that pierced the man through and through, causing blood to spurt out from all possible cracks. Hank saw this monster. It was much larger than all the previous ones. Its body looked like an elongated pumpkin. Its eyes were black, and there were sharp spikes on its head, on one of which Warren's body was hanging. The hero clearly understood that he should run, that he had the strength and hide in a secluded place, deciding that the cave would be perfect. He hid behind its wall. Suddenly he heard someone's ominous voice from the darkness of the underground palace. This something repeated that he warned that no one should come to him. Turning around, Hank saw how many decomposed and gnawed corpses lay inside. The monster believed that his words would not reach people until they were all dead. The outlines of a male body began to appear from the darkness. He leaned on a stick, seeing that the new visitor was not leaving. He urged him to attack, because he would not have the courage to go outside. Hank decided to try his luck and loudly announced that he was not looking for a fight. He just needed cover from the monster outside, but he was ready to defend himself if the enemy attacked first. Suddenly, a mysterious voice from the pitch darkness recognized the hero's voice. Without hesitation, he pronounced the hero's name, but he was very angry, thinking that another monster had designs on him. Chester loudly warned him that he should not go further into the cave. If he touched it, he would die immediately. His body looked disgusting. He became like this because of the shimmering jade. As soon as you touch it, the body will begin to collapse, like all the bodies inside. The man was lucky, since his essence was the possibility of rebirth, thanks to which he was able to survive. Chester turned to Hank again. He was incredibly happy to meet him, and he also noted that his daughter would be happy to see him. But the hero did not remember both of them. Then the man realized that the rumors about memory loss were true. He said that his daughter's name was Hannah. Jade can't reach her since he placed her in the core, which I installed in a frame so that other objects would not touch it. Until the girl awakens her essence, he feels obligated to protect her. This time he hoped that he could save his daughter. Chester asked if Hank was hungry. He had quite a lot of food in the cave. He offered to go inside to the fire, but asked to beware of the flickering stones. The guy decided to take advantage of the opportunity and absorbed the bat that he took from Warren. The man was not surprised by this ability of the hero. He noted that he had not changed at all. He invited him to taste the meat of a giant crab, which he took from one of the thieves who broke in there. The piece was larger than the guy's head and did not look very appetizing. Hank nevertheless decided to try the food, swallowing a piece. He was delighted with the taste of the meat. They continued to sit by the fire. The hero asked Chester what kind of relationship they were in and what he knew about him. The man said that the guy was a benefactor. It was he who saved the life of his daughter. They met before returning on the 8th day of the test. Everything around looked exactly the same as this time. People were running away from green monsters. Chester ran away with Hannah. They held hands, but the girl could not keep up with her father and asked him to move slower. But he was afraid that they would be caught and killed. Goblins were practically unkillable even then. Even with their throats cut, they still attacked people and killed them with ease. Trying to hide from them, they ran very quickly, and at some point the girl could not stand it. She tripped and fell. The man screamed and then tried to cover her with his body. The goblin was already in a jump and was preparing to chop them into small pieces when suddenly he himself was chopped up. It was Hank. He appeared in front of the invincible goblins and dealt with all the monsters without blinking an eye. The main character led them to a secret shelter in the rock where there were already many people, including children. Gina was waiting for them, who warmly greeted the guy. Hank brought them to his team, introduced them to the rest of the participants, announcing that they were now part of it too. The other young girls in the camp were delighted to have a new young and pretty friend. They admired her beauty and height, and also asked many questions. The heroes' team included people who were looking for a safe shelter. They did not want to kill and get involved in fights again. They were all happy to have new members of the community. They needed workers to set up new barricades, so they became part of Hank's group, and they all had a place to settle down instead of fighting for their lives. But unfortunately, one day they were deprived of all this. Hank returned to the camp, but instead of the living, he saw many mutilated corpses. His group was a place of cooperation, trust, and peace. More members were added every day. They soon became the largest group in the area, but other groups conspired to attack them. After waiting for Hank to go defend the stronghold, they attacked them, first trying to lure them out by a girl who asked for help. The people on duty at the entrance tried to understand whether she had come alone, asked her to take a couple of steps back and raise her hands. The girl was very beautiful, and one of them decided to go out to meet her, although he was warned that raised hands would not save his essence. Approaching her, the man patted her down for weapons. He asked her not to do anything suspicious, and then they would go inside and she would get a hot meal. Suddenly, her body broke into many pieces, from which many sharp arrows came out and pierced the guards on duty. After killing them, the girl and many crazy people went inside Hank's camp. They were all thirsty for blood and killed everyone, men, women, and children. When the hero returned to his hideout, he saw dozens of bodies of innocent people. He was furious, ordered the survivors to wait, and then went outside. And when he returned, he did not utter a word, but words would have been superfluous, because the blood of his opponents covered him from head to toe. One morning, Hank told the remaining survivors that he was leaving, and he didn't care if they followed him, stayed, or joined other groups. But Chester cried and grieved over the loss of his daughter. He could not leave her there alone. He asked for forgiveness for not being able to follow him, although he had saved them once. The man had lost the meaning of life, so he didn't want to go anywhere. He only dreamed of death, but because of his ability to revive, all attempts were in vain. He spent his days thinking about various methods of suicide, until one day he learned about the existence of an cannibal's cave, where any substances are melted, leaving no trace behind. That's where they were. They call it the green-yellow mine. That's why he looked like that, because he jumped into the cave then. He jumped there without regrets, but with a great desire to die, straight to where the huge piece of jade lay. His body began to melt. And then it was reborn and melted again, and so over and over again, he struggled with pain and suffering, sank deeper and deeper into the jade until he touched his heart with his hand. The green-yellow mineral offered to grant special abilities to whoever absorbed it, and the man agreed. Then there was a bright explosion. When he finally came to his senses, he was completely burned. There was no hair left on him. The light membrane protected the jade from decay. This precious mineral was an extremely rare element that gives additional essence, but the fact that he got it meant that he could not die. The man found it quite ironic that the second entity was also related to survival. Chester began to wander in search of other places where he could die. Then he heard about people who opposed God. One of them was Hank. It seemed to the man that since he intervened, this world would become a better place. But God called the souls of the vanquished. He promised to give them a second chance and preserve their memories. And then they all returned to the new world. He sat on the asphalt next to his daughter Hannah. As soon as they saw each other, they hugged and cried. After what happened, they went together to the cave, where he again jumped into the jade, and after taking out the mineral, he forced his daughter to absorb it. Probably due to unexpected contact with him, Hannah lost her mind and is still sleeping, so he hoped for the help of the great king. He knelt in front of Hank. He begged him to take his daughter with him. He just wanted her to survive, but the guy doubted it, since he had no memories left. The man promised to help find and give him back his boots, which once belonged to him. This was the only element in this area. He also advised the guy to find Jared. They were former comrades in arms, and he even sacrificed his life for the sake of the hero. Chester promised that Hank would be able to increase his status if he cooperated with him again. He begged to protect his daughter in exchange for information. Suddenly, the shell-shaped walkie-talkie buzzed in the hero's pocket. The owner of the pair of shells called him. It was Julian. He thought he was communicating with Warren. Julian promised to come at sunset. He asked to get him something, and it didn't matter to him if he needed to sacrifice all the people in the team. He also boasted that he had finally received the boots of the former great king. They were lying in a box next to him. As soon as Hank finished talking on the walkie-talkie, Chester asked who was on the other end of the sink and what he wanted. The hero explained that the man introduced himself as Julian. He said that he had found boots and would soon reach the cave. The man saw a danger in this, since apparently the blonde man was aiming for a green-yellow mineral. But the main character did not remember who the caller was. Chester explained that they had once been comrades with the hero, and now he led a powerful team. Hank didn't understand why he couldn't just talk to him, but the man was adamant. There was no guarantee that Julian was still a good person. He also noted that if all the groups entering the cave were normal, but they would not have such a strange smell, the crazy people smelled differently. Meanwhile, Julian led the procession of his large team. He saddled a large chicken, covering its eyes and controlling the rods. One of his companions complimented his boots. He noted that although the man had found them before his return, he had given them to the great king, and now they had returned to their rightful owner. But Julian explained that Hank found them first, and if not for the entity that allowed him to survive critical moments, he would have been dead several times already. It was the main character who defeated the named monster that guarded the element, the sacred mummy, and was also able to defeat the pterosaur, which no one could defeat. And the guy did it all alone, as if he was specially born for this crazy world. Such was the great king. In the past world, Hank did not allow the weak to shed blood. Everyone agreed with his words, including Julian, but he considered this a mistake, because then he thought that they were on equal terms. But the hero took a step back to adapt to those around him. They were all too weak compared to him, including the leader. The blonde was sure that after returning everything had changed. He was able to get his boots, and Hank was no longer a special player. Julian was very eager to receive a special element that would bestow a second essence. He wanted to become special. His team approached the cave. They did not find any other people nearby, but decided not to let their guard down. Then they moved inside. They tried to shout to their comrade, but no one answered them. Then they decided to shine a light inside, when suddenly Chester's voice drove them away. He came out of the shadow of the cave to inform them that they were late, since he had already given the mineral to his daughter. The people from the team were irritated. They were raising trouble, but the man continued to warn them not to approach, otherwise they would die. Then one of them said that he was ready to try. He reached out and grabbed Chester by the face, but almost instantly his palm began to melt. Julian suggested not to waste time, but to simply burn everything to the ground. The guard of the cave was against it, since his daughter was still sleeping. Just when the man began to threaten them, the commander suddenly activated his essence. He could not allow the gem to belong to someone like Chester. Suddenly, Julian's shell walkie-talkie buzzed in his pocket. The caller wanted to take his boots back. The guy recognized Hank's voice. The main character invited the opponent to fight each other. If he wins, he will receive his essence, and if he loses, he will return his boots. Without having time to wait for an answer, the hero stood on the edge of the cliff. He called the blonde a dirty, envious man, and also accused him of cowardice, since he did not agree to fight. Hank continued to shout, indicating that the guy had stolen his things. Others from the team recognized the great king and were curious about what he was talking about. The hero did not understand why Julian was standing and silent. Perhaps he was afraid, but Hank suggested that the guy attack first, because the essence and boots were at stake. The commander turned to his like-minded person. He understood the hint and activated his essence. Julian tried to decide what was more important to him at the moment. On one side of the scale, he had a valuable mineral, and on the other, the taste of steel. They were equivalent to him, but he really wanted to cut off the hero's arms and legs. Then Julian decided to go on the attack. He jumped towards the guy, but Hank got ahead of him and used his powerful kick ability. The hero nailed him deep into the rock. Stones scattered around him. He continued to strike, only now fighting with the remaining team below. Their manager was already coming to his senses, but he didn't understand why Hank was dealing with them so easily, because they were outnumbered, and he was alone. One of the community members looked at the hero with the gaze of a gorgon jellyfish, and the guy's leg began to turn to stone. This gave the others an advantage, since now he could not move. Then they began to attack him several at a time, but Hank deliberately grabbed the metal parts of their weapons in order to then absorb them. After uttering the code word, his wounds immediately regenerated. He was able to hit one of the attackers, but someone attacked from behind, cutting his shoulder. But all the hero's cuts healed instantly. He was able to kill one of the team members. Then he again absorbed someone's weapon, and the next wound disappeared. He was as good as new. Julian's like-minded people began to run away in all directions. They were horrified that the great king had no wounds left. It seemed that it was impossible to defeat him. But then the blonde fulfilled the conditions for activating his essence. Releasing magic, he was furious and believed that Hank appeared on his way to interfere. The hero sincerely did not understand what he was talking about, which only angered the attacker more, who could not understand that the guy without memories managed to knock him down. Julian desperately wanted to defeat the great king. They continued the battle until Hank knocked out the enemy with one blow. The hero began to have pain all over his body. Chester was worried about him, but the guy convinced him that everything was fine and he would soon feel better. The blonde lying on the ground noticed a bottle of pills that Kent had previously given to the king. They could activate suppressed abilities, as well as erase thoughts and emotions. These pills had a face. They seduced the guy to take them, promising that he would immediately feel much better. The guys noticed late what he was about to do. They acted instantly. He was not just cured, but became several times a larger monster. Having struck the guy, he felt how he was overwhelmed with magic. The battle armor was extremely unhappy that her boyfriend got the pills after all. She prepared them especially for him, and he threw them into the cave. Julian continued to rejoice. All his more and suffering no longer posed a problem for him. He felt amazing. Their fingers intertwined. Hank tried to restrain the monster's strength. Enhanced by the influence of drugs, Julian believed that the hero could not come to his senses. He was no longer the king. Then the monster crushed the palm of the guy, who squealed in pain. He wanted the hero to no longer be able to use the essence, since he was not worthy to be called a great king. Meanwhile, as the monster felt all its power and magic, Hank could barely stand. All his fingers were broken. He tried to deflect the blows. But just as he decided to use his super-powerful foot, Julian caught him by the ankle and threw him into a stone wall. Suddenly, tears began to appear on the monster's back, from which new hands began to grow. He acquired a new magical body with 6 arms. This gave him a significant advantage in the fight. Now he could strike blow after blow. Without stopping, Hank was saved from death by armor, which turned out to be very durable. Chester watched the battle from the side. It seemed to him that things were bad. He took out a dagger, which he was going to give to his daughter. Julian thought about the fact that he should tear off the guy's hands. There was too much trouble with them. When he got down to business, the guy started screaming in pain, but the monster liked to hear them. He knew that without his arms, the great king would not be able to use his essence, but Hank had fought all his previous battles, including the one where they were torn off from him. The guy saw the image of Gina in his head. Then he came to his senses and smiled, answering that even without hands he could fight. But the monster did not want to give victory to the enemy so easily. He wanted to become a hero in this life, and not a weakling like Hank, urging him to behave in accordance with his weakness. The monster grabbed the hero and then held him with all his many arms. He was eager to break the guy in half. Realizing that this was his last chance to stop the enemy, Chester threw himself on his back, holding himself around his neck. No matter how strong the magical armor was, the jade would still melt it. He was ready to hold out to the last, until his essence stopped working, or until the jade completely corroded the guy. The old man's body was covered with bubbles. Although Julian's armor melted, it did not in any way affect his human image. Chester tried with all his might to wake up Hank, who was lying on the floor with his arms torn off and covered in blood. He wanted to give him his dagger and begged him to take care of his daughter, and then completely turned into a gem. Hannah watched her father's sacrifice but could do nothing about it, while Julian rejoiced that he survived thanks to his strength. Turning around, he saw Hank stand up and pick up the fallen dagger with his mouth, then place it in his hand. Having uttered the code word, the hero's arms grow back, and he regains his strength, and then with great speed he attacks the enemy and smashes his arm with one powerful blow. Julian was jealous of this ability, but Hank continued to attack him, claiming that he was mistaken when he said that he knew him well. The hero continuously struck at his opponent, ending with his signature salamander trident foot attack. Having finally finished the battle, Hank stood surrounded by corpses. Julian was defeated. For his death, the hero received coins as a reward. There were more of them than usually given for an ordinary murder. Suddenly, an image of Kent appeared. She was lying on a bottle of pills, trying to get the guy to eat one. She was licking her lips with her long, demonic tongue. But he didn't want to do this, because it was these pills that created a monster out of Julian. They were dangerous, so he just kicked them away. The young man heard someone's muffled whimpering. Turning around, he noticed Hannah sitting next to the mutated body of her father. The girl cried bitterly, calling for her father. Hank approached her, and as soon as she looked at him, she immediately recognized him as the great king from the past world. She continued to sob, stood up abruptly, and walked over to him to bury her face in his chest for comfort. She wanted to know why her dad looked like that. The hero hugged his orphaned friend, trying to calm her down at least a little. Then they decided to cover the body of the deceased with stones, and the girl cut off a lock of her hair to leave it at the makeshift grave. Hannah said goodbye to Chester in this way. She told him that it was time for her to leave. Hank, meanwhile, was packing his things and did not forget about his boots. The girl wanted to go with him. The guy conveyed to her the words of her father. He asked him to take care of his daughter. She was delighted. She wanted to start fighting enemies together. Suddenly, the main character felt a strange smell. He covered the girl with himself and kicked him in the air. He hit one of Julian's like-minded people, Jack, hitting him in the nose while he was worried about how they could find him. Hank explained that people like him stink of animals, and also suggested that he leave on his own. Otherwise, he would be taken out by force, but already dead. But the guy did not want to leave. He was afraid that he would not survive alone. Jack was on his knees. He remembered how Julian spoke about a certain place called Katla, where you can get influence points. This is a city that arose after the start of the main test. It appeared in the desert as a result of the fusion of 3 Cassandra needles. People flocked to such cities to gain knowledge and power. They appeared in many desert zones. Their team was also going there, and he knew how to get there. Hank didn't think long. He was wondering what this place was, so he invited Jack to take them. But first they needed to find shelter before sunset. They also had to pack their things. An oasis awaited them along the way. It was a shorter walk to get to it than to the city. There they could get water and food, and also admire the wonderful view. Jack expected them to arrive before dawn, but he strongly advised them to stay away from the giant cacti. Coming out of the cave, Hank saw a large rooster saddled. He decided that he would carry things on it, at the same time warning the newcomer about betrayal and its consequences. Hannah collected her things. Everyone was ready and decided to move out. The gray-haired one said that he would lead everyone along a safe route, but literally immediately they were attacked by a huge worm. They had to urgently run away from it. Jack believed that the monsters in this area were small, so everything would be fine, but the guys had to fight back. Hank tried to attack the worm, but was not very successful. Then Hannah entered the battle, using her essence and a spear. The spear contained a piece of jade, and as soon as it hit the monster, its skin began to melt and it fell dead. The guy was impressed by her abilities. Jack, meanwhile, climbed onto the rock and saw an oasis in the distance. He called the others to head in the right direction. But the city did not look like a paradise. Huge trees grew through houses that were badly destroyed. Their roots spread everywhere. In one of the basements, a man was crying. He was covered in blood. He asked for mercy. Since he was not guilty, he did not know that he had come to that very place. The man in the hood did not want to hear these words. He took out a hammer and killed the young man. He believed that you should not break into someone else's house, even if you did not know it, since this is a crime. He was angry that low-grade people, like the murdered one, were walking around everywhere. He was already very tired of this. There were already a lot of corpses around the room. The guys entered a deserted city. They were very confused by the smell. Continuing their journey, they came across mountains of the dead, suggesting that there was a struggle for power there and no one survived. Hannah suggested that they stop by one of the buildings. She was sure that food used to be sold on the ground floor. Jack was afraid to go down, but Hank insisted. since the guy's essence allowed him to become invisible, and if there was a person or monster there, he could send a signal through the shell. He suggested making one call if there were people there and several, if there were many, and he also insistently asked not to try to deceive them. The guy activated his invisibility and began to go down inside. He was very scared, and he begged to be saved if something happened. Hank counted to 100 and decided that he could go to the basement too. Hannah wanted to go with him, but he insisted that she should stay upstairs. As a result, the girl convinced him to go together, and they began to go down to the basement. It was quiet and dark there, when suddenly the walkie-talkie beeped. There was only one signal, which means there was one person there. He had already grabbed Jack by the neck and tried to strangle him. He was dissatisfied with the fact that all sorts of insects were walking in his domain. He realized that besides the guy there were other people. He called them to come closer, so he could destroy them all at once. As soon as the guys walked inside, the guy in the hood immediately recognized Hank. Although he couldn't believe his eyes, he took off his headdress and greeted the hero. He recognized the Great King by his face and boots. Throwing Jack away, he ran to Hank and hugged him tightly, wondering where he had been. The hero did not understand why the boy rushed to hug him. He explained that after returning he tried to find the guy, but did not know where he was, so he decided to start from that place. The guy boasted that it usually takes 2 weeks to get to the city, but he was able to get here in just 3 days, which he was very proud of. Taking the Great King's hand, he happily led him inside so he could rest, and he also hoped that they could talk. Hank stopped and let go of his hand. He wanted to know who was in front of him and how he knew him. The boy was surprised that the hero did not remember him. Heinrich quickly changed his mood. He was still very glad that they met, because if he had forgotten Hank, he still would not have left him. He then gave the hero the winner's ring, which, when activated, allows him to inflict critical damage on his opponent on the first hit. This ring used to belong to him. He gave it to Heinrich, saying that he was like a younger brother to him. The boy wanted to return it, but was ready to take it back if he was very active. But Hank didn't understand why he should return it since it was so precious, but the guy was a little upset that his friend still didn't believe him. Jack turned to Henry. He recognized the guy and called him Mr. New Moon, but then explained to everyone that he was one of the king's close associates. The 4 moons helped the sun, the Great King, in everything. He was the strongest of them all. The guy confirmed his words, hoping that the hero would recognize him. Suddenly, he flew up to Hannah and grabbed her sharply. Hank tried to force him to let go of the girl since he was protecting her. New Moon believed that the hero did not need a girl on the team. He called her weak and thought that she would fall from one blow from anyone who was lying in the hall. Hank decided to clarify. He killed all these people. The guy confirmed that he did it. Those who came annoyed him and he had to do it. He believed that the hero's comrades were weak and did not suit him. They belittled the value of the Great King before the guy seemed stronger to him. Henry suspected that the man before him had lost his former fighting spirit, but he was determined to make him a great warrior again, proposing to get rid of the weak first. But Hank was very angry at his words. He could not understand why he wanted to kill his friends, since he calls himself his brother. Then he struck the boy. The guy remembered Chester's words about animals. That's what they call those who, after the appearance of the tower, went crazy in the New World. These people killed everyone without hesitation because of a simple desire. A specific smell emanates from them. The same one emanated from Lord New Moon. Hank continued the attack, but the guy quickly dodged, and in the end the hero decided to try to put on the ring, which had just been returned to him. He threw super strong blows again and again, but each time Heinrich avoided them without the slightest problem while keeping his hands behind his back. At one point, the young man jumped on Hank's shoulders. He admired his kicks, was glad that he was not mistaken in the hero. He was the same as before. The king threw the guy off of him. Then Henry offered to award victory in the duel to the one who was the first to touch the other. And as soon as the hero swung his leg to strike, his foot was very close to the guy's face, but he was able to get away from him unnoticed. Hank was already exhausted in this fight. The guy said that since the beginning of enlightenment, his abilities began to improve very quickly, and his strength and speed went beyond imagination. Jack watched from the side what was happening. He could not understand what was happening. They were moving too fast. Their eyes could not keep up with their movements. Heinrich decided to play tag with his opponent. He invited the hero to try to catch him where he clapped his hands. Hank was angry that he couldn't even hit his opponent. The difference in their abilities wasn't very great, but suddenly he remembered a similar incident. Then the hero activated the victor's determination ability on his ring. He only needed one hit. But as soon as he swung, the guy immediately reacted and squatted down, and then he was able to touch the armor with his foot, thus declaring his victory. Since the attack of the winner's determination failed, with such a small blow, Henry caused the guy to have critical consequences in response. The guy sprayed blood from his mouth. New Moon realized what happened. He figured it was because he hung out with losers, hence his loosening grip. He asked the hero to trust him, even if he was unpleasant to him now, but then he would definitely be grateful. He was ready to start dealing with one of his comrades. But Hank stood opposite him, protecting Hannah. Suddenly, he loudly shouted to Jack to start now, but he didn't understand what it was about. Then the guy tried his luck and struck, but failed the chance. The hero again injured himself with his mistake. Heinrich was upset that he still did not understand anything. There was still a slight difference between them. Deciding to demonstrate it, he began to move around the room at super speed, which made it seem like there was a lot of him. He encouraged Hank, because if he could eventually touch him, he would cause him critical damage. The hero tried to catch the real master, but with each blow he missed and only made things worse for himself, eventually falling to the floor from loss of blood. Then he thought that he had given Hank the ring too soon. He was not yet ready to use it, and reached out to take it. But the hero wrapped his arms around Heinrich's body. He thought for a second that he remembered him, but Hank had a different plan of action. He held the new moon so that Hannah could pierce it with her spear. The guy gave her the ring so that they would have at least some advantage. The gentleman realized that Hank was faking the return of the penalty in order to deceive him. He could not believe how he could decide on a trick. Hoping that now he would leave them behind, the heroes wanted to leave, but Heinrich was not going to give up. He claimed that he would kill them all. Hank put the ring back on and suggested playing tag again. Having struck, he hurt the guy very much, so his inner voice told him. Hank struck a few more blows and finished it all with the final one. The next moment, a certain white viscous liquid began to pour out of Heinrich's mouth. It flowed like a strong fountain, which shocked everyone present. The guy didn't look like a nice boy anymore. He was covered in this liquid and his eyes were glowing green. He told them that he was fine and not to worry. Henry's essence continued to convince him that Hank had hurt him. Then his body turned into a huge white ball. The hero realized that he was possessed by God. Balls began to emerge from this ball, which then turned into long ribbons. There were a lot of them, and they grabbed the team and hung them in the air. At the end of each of them, there were sharp spikes. The hero began to fight them off with his feet. He was able to free himself, and then Hannah, the girl, fell to the floor and hurt herself. The main character asked her if she knew what was happening to Heinrich. Then he came close to her and whispered a plan of action in her ear. She ran as quickly as she could in the opposite direction from the scene of events. Jack followed her. He was terrified and asked her to wait for him. Last time, the hero did not have enough strength to defeat a creature whose capabilities went beyond human limits. He urgently needed to gain an advantage that would allow him to resist the possessed god. Hank decided to request status. It's time to use the accumulated coins to raise his status of physical strength, speed, and durability. He remembered Gina telling him that his essence regained its strength through the light of absorbing elements, but he could still use it to its fullest after. The hero remembered that he could try to eat the ring, so he was able to study the technique of the winner's determination. Inside the ball, meanwhile, Heinrich tried to confront the deity. He tried to convince him that Hank was not to blame and he himself was hurt. He tearfully begged God not to touch the hero. He pressed on the fact that he was a believer, but the deity believed that he was too kind a child, and he smelled bad of the hero. Then the deity Alex grew many times in size. Now it would not be a ball, but something resembling a huge jellyfish. Hank realized that it would not be easy to escape from such a monster. Kent appeared on his shoulder. She offered her help in the battle, ready to replace him at any moment. But he threw it off his shoulder, not wanting to go through this attraction again. But the deity did not give up. Meanwhile, he continued to spend coins to improve his speed characteristics. The hero rushed to attack the enemy. He gracefully dodged long, stinging ribbons. Hank was much slower than them, so in flight he continued to add points to his speed. And at first he was able to cut the tentacles with his kicks, but then Alex grabbed him by the leg and threw him forcefully to the side. The guy understood that his strength was not enough to cope with this strange monster, and at this rate he would lose. He was already completely exhausted, continuing to gain more speed, but the monster didn't even strain. Hank couldn't get through them to the body. Using the ring's actions and activating Victor's resolve, he attempted to attack again, but the blow failed to cause the necessary destruction and was then impaled through the ribbons. Kent was immediately furious at what Alex was doing with her ward, and she urgently demanded that she be allowed to switch with him. Hank resisted, but then he activated his second essence beyond the horizon, and the confrontation between the gods was confirmed. His deity was delighted with this plan. She supported him. Meanwhile, the hero began a crazy dance of martial arts. Alex was amazed that a man was able to suppress a deity with his will. Meanwhile, Hank was turning into a better version of himself, building up muscle mass. She promised that the retribution for the fact that the hero had harmed her believer and caused him pain would be cruel. She promised to make the guy repent. Hank was finally completely ready for battle. He challenged Alex, inviting him to choose where the first blow would be sent. Suddenly, water gushed from the destroyed pipe. It began to fill everything inside. Hannah and Jack ran into the room. They were carrying bottles of water in their hands. It turned out that earlier Hank asked them to go to the boiler room and turn on the water. The girl wondered if they had brought enough water. Hank touched his boots and then absorbed them, giving him the ability to control the clear water around him using telekinesis. He began to try to learn how to use the water, trying to make streams rise into the air and create a whirlpool around him. The guy was filled with confidence that now not only luck, but also talent was on his side, and he would finally be able to resist the deity. Hank tried to direct the streams of water towards the monster, and although he was impressed, he still tried to attack the guy from behind, who successfully repelled the attack with the help of a vertical surface of water. The main character tried to create huge snakes from the water. They looked quite scary, ready to attack the enemy at any moment. Looking at the deity with a confident look, he stated that such monsters were not needed in their world. Then he raised the serpents and streams of water into the air. But the deity was sure that it would be impossible for any person to defeat him. But under the powerful jets, his liquid armor began to disintegrate. Heinrich, who had lost faith, came out of his protective shell. He looked at Hank and called him, but he did not want to contact him. He wanted the guy to disappear. The hero then delivered a powerful kick to his opponent's chest. He screamed in pain and landed on the floor with great force, punching a hole in it. Mr. New Moon was unconscious. The system confirmed that the second essence was used by Hank for self-defense. The deity was expelled from the guy, thus the hero received a new achievement, expelling gods. The hero tried to realize that he had just defeated a god. His body began to take on his usual form, but he understood that it was too early to let his guard down. When suddenly Heinrich woke up and sat up, the guys did not understand how this was happening. He began to cry, calling Hank and calling him incredible. He rushed to the hero with his arms, asking for forgiveness for being wrong, and he also promised that he would no longer kill everyone. The young man continued to admire the king. He was interested in how Hank was able to get rid of the seal of the believer and dispel the presence of the god. But Hank, in fact, himself did not understand how this happened. Heinrich tried to understand whether he did it unconsciously. It seemed incredible to him. The great king did not share his younger comrade's delight. He did not understand how anyone could be happy in such a situation. The world was completely destroyed. Complete chaos reigned around. The law of the jungle reigned. Everyone was for himself. In this world, the weak are subjugated by force, and crazy days and battles follow, where everyone hates each other and tries to kill each other. Heinrich thought that what was happening was natural, and he also believed that the creators did a great job of making them feel that way. He decided to explain that enlightenment is not just a game for the amusement of angels, it is preparation for a quest, similar to a test. But even if you finish the quest, the game itself will not end, because ultimately everything must end in the head. There is a hidden image in the status window that displays willpower indicators. As soon as they reach the maximum, the person breaks down. Each breakdown occurs in its own way. The instigator of everything was the main god Kasida, who captured the earth. In the New World, there is only one law. The strongest will survive. This is the rule of natural selection. Only then will the will of humanity be broken and a new order will begin, kill or be killed. When the game ends, the world will be ruled by the representative of the strongest god, but for the earth, enlightenment continues, because there is only one person left whose willpower has not been broken. It was Hank. Before returning, no one knew about it. Everyone considered the goal of the game to kill God, and those who continue to think so were targeting the great king. Henry was able to overhear all this from the angels, because after returning, everyone did nothing but put forward hypotheses about the meaning of the new world. New Moon heard that the king was leading the people. He hoped that with such a leader, the world would be able to return to normal someday. Hank realized that everything he had done before returning was pointless, but the master did not know what to answer. He believed that it did not matter. Heinrich was sure that at the moment the hero was at a higher level, few could repeat his achievements. As soon as he started his old speech that with him the guy would become a great king again, when he was stopped, he decided to sit down and rest a little before going to Katla. Once they reached the city, they were met by a new distraught man. He impaled Jack on his spear, calling their lives pathetic. He noticed that there was a seal on Hank's cheek. He did not let them in, wondering if they knew where they had come to. The man called the city of Katla, the holy land of the deity Aruga. Behind the fence there was a large, beautiful, and developed settlement with a pyramid in the center. The city was huge. It consisted of several circles. In the largest there was a large tower. In the rest there were pyramids in the center. The city was fenced with powerful walls. Approaching the main gate, Jack said that they would have to pay for entry. He volunteered to negotiate personally. When suddenly a heavily muscled man descended from above on a rope, he had a spear in his hands and was obviously in an unfavorable mood. A gray-haired man came out to meet him. He was scared by the hostility of the guard. He said that they were ready to pay for entry if required. But he didn't even want to listen to what the negotiator was going to tell him. He took out his trident and put the guy on him. He didn't want to see those branded in the city. The guys decided to hide to discuss the situation. Despite the fact that they had plenty of money, this did not make sense, since due to the blessing of another god, Hank would not be able to enter. This part of the region is ruled by the god Aruga. The city was summoned from another world so that the believers would force others to follow their commandment. All these people, like earthlings, passed the test and received the role of managers of this place, becoming like angels. There are two ways to get inside. To obtain resident status and missions, you need to donate a certain number of coins every day. By choosing the Aruga religion, you can become a full-fledged resident of the city. If you collect the maximum number of influence points and receive part of the city, the test will end. Hank ordered them to go first and take his things with them. He asked if they had enough time to get inside. Heinrich immediately agreed. He took Hannah by the hand and promised that he would look after her, and the hero himself headed out, asking the guys to take care of each other. The guy decided to get inside in a different way. He killed the guard and then took his device for lifting up. It seemed lighter than it actually was. Hank hooked himself to the cord, then fired the pistols upward so that the hook caught on the edge of the fence and pulled himself up. Rising upstairs, he looked around the city and decided where he would go, but suddenly he noticed Michael sitting on a dais. Hank explained that he was not allowed in because of stigma, and Jack was killed, but he cannot walk in the desert forever, and besides, this world originally belonged to people. The guy wanted to find out where God was, since it was his land, and then he decided to go down again, thus receiving the achievement of the first attacker and saboteur. Meanwhile, Hannah stood at the entrance and tried to get inside through security. She was given a list for her mission. The girl did not understand what was required of her, and just as she wanted to hit the inspector, Heinrich grabbed her and closed her mouth, and then thanked her for the mission. They got inside. Hannah was interested in the reason why he agreed to such conditions for passage. She was very angry. Then he explained to her that natural selection reigns supreme in this community, and any person without strength and power is equated to garbage. New Moon had no idea how the commandment would end if the city was taken by force, since Aruga wants to have a certain number of believers at all times. This means that his main goal is to strengthen faith and not to increase the number of believers. He threatened the girl that if she did anything to harm Hank, he would kill her. Suddenly, Taurus approached them with his retinue of guards. He recognized Mr. New Moon and noted that after their return, they had not seen each other. He greeted the new guests and noted that it was a great honor for him to meet Henry, but he did not recognize him and asked to get out of his sight. Taurus was not offended by his words. He explained that from today he is the manager of the shopping area. Its essence, sweet language, specializes in bargaining and persuasion, and also allows you to instill the necessary thoughts in your interlocutors. He boasted that with his brains, essence, and money, it was easy to get into the right team and get a high position. He then offered the guys a mission that would earn them a lot of fusion points, which could guarantee them a great life. Henry was tired of listening to him. He asked to explain everything in a nutshell, then Taurus invited them to work with him. He explained that he has great influence but lacks strength, so he offers to help each other and strengthen their cooperation in the future. At the same time, he threatened to kill them if he refused, but Heinrich was stunned by the number of words spoken, and he did not like to hear the threat addressed to him. But the merchant's retinue had already put their spears forward, protecting the owner. He asked if the guy was sure that in the event of a battle, he could protect the girl next to him. Noting that many would not mind acquiring a slave of any race, they are sold here at a fairly high price. But Henry was already quite fed up with this conversation, and he did not appreciate the threat against them, so he activated his essence, offering to kill the man. Taurus was offended by this attitude of Mr. New Moon towards his person. He wanted to tell about his essence, but he was interrupted. Soldiers in special uniforms claimed that they were attacked at the northeast gate, and he called on everyone to join. Hank, jumping over the fence, killed several guards. He himself was seriously injured, so he urgently needed to absorb the elements. When he tried to eat their weapons, he realized that nothing was working. Deciding that it was because they were not human, then he began to look for shelter. Then he tried to tear up one of his tickets to call the arms dealer. A bright girl named Marie appeared. She was very loud, greeting the client, but noticed that no one was around. Marie was scared. She was trying to understand who called her. It turned out that she sat right on top of the guy and didn't notice him until he reacted. Then she apologized and helped him get up. But Hank was not happy with her thunderous voice. He angrily whispered to her to shut her mouth, and then covered it with his hand, looking around to see if she had attracted too much attention. Marie began to cry as she realized that she had been summoned during the fight, wondering who in the world had given such a bad person as Hank her exclusive summoning ticket. The seller laid out her goods on a mat right on the floor. The hero said that he didn't care what to buy. He was ready to spend all the coins on the goods. He took the first dagger he came across and decided to buy it. The girl was surprised and asked where he was going to use it. Marie was very puzzled by his answer that he was just going to eat it. She immediately imagined him biting off the blade and chewing it, thinking the guy was crazy. She was greatly shocked to see that after being absorbed, all his wounds disappeared. His essence also allowed him to gain the abilities of objects. Suddenly, the girl became embarrassed. She was curious if she could see the client's status in her magic ball. They sat down opposite each other, and after she said the code word and said the client's name, she gained access to information about the guy. Opening his status, she saw all his available techniques and abilities. She realized that he was collecting elements, and then she suddenly grabbed his fingers. Marie noticed the imprint of the winner's ring. Since it was spattered with blood, she could not see it from the very beginning. Hank decided to inquire whether such a diverse number of features was very rare. Then she noticed that the guy had the mark of a goddess and considered him a very dangerous person. Then she screamed, answering his question that this was incredible. The girl explained that initially only historians and great heroes of various races of many worlds had the elements. Records were kept about these treasures. Therefore, the abilities were not so easy to obtain, and in general, the fact that the hero has elements imprinted on his body and soul after use is an amazing skill. For example, accelerating blood loss causes his blows to bleed, while maximizing pain with each hit increases damage to the opponent. She considered all this unthinkable, and especially the favor of God, which is no easier to obtain, because for this, he must like him. She also noted that a guy can use his abilities more effectively, and if he starts buying exactly the elements that he needs, they will only improve his existing abilities. Then she suggested that he buy the corsage of the fallen aristocrat. It increased the maximization of pain and reduced weight. Hank immediately agreed to her offer and bought the goods, and also asked for a bag. The girl was very happy. Marie said that he had a special storage room where he could store items, but the guy didn't understand this and decided that it was always faster to get what he needed from his bag. Then the seller began to collect her things, thanking her for the purchase as a farewell, when suddenly she noticed his cuirass, praised the excellent work. Hank beat her to it and informed her that the item was not for sale. The girl really wanted to buy his armor. Then her assessment of the seller would increase several hundred times, and no one else in the association would dare to disrespect her. Marie bowed. She understood that selling a thing given by God is a sin, and the person who does this will face great trouble, but the attempt is not torture. But she finally lost her dream, drooling and saying that if she bought the cuirass, she could take the position of branch manager and achieve success as a salesperson. When suddenly Hank noticed the shadows of unknown people, he quickly grabbed the seller. She screamed in fear, not understanding why he was behaving this way, because work comes first for her. The hero tried to save the girl from the attacking soldiers guarding the city. They had already jumped off the roof and were flying towards them. He threw the girl aside so that she would not be harmed, and he himself began to fight with his rivals, who were armed with sharp daggers. Their faces were completely wrapped in ribbons, their ears were pointy, and only one eye. Hank was filled with confidence. He grabbed his scimitar and devoured it. The hero, with the help of his irresistible kick attack, was able to cut off the creature's hand holding the dagger and then struck him on the head. In a fight with another, he was able to cut off its head with just one slight movement, which flew past Marie, who squealed in fear. After the battle was over and Hank was the winner, he approached the seller and solemnly announced that he had an offer for her. He admitted that he was going to capture this city, which is called the Holy Land, so he was sure that it was full of divine objects. His proposal was that he would sell her all these items, and in return she would collect goods that suited his abilities. Then she could not only become the head of the branch, but also the president of the association. The girl was afraid that it would be difficult for Hank, but he didn't care. After a few moments, she was very happy and agreed. They shook hands and she said that she relied on him. Marie handed the guy her personal call-up cards and also admitted that she would be looking forward to his next call-up. After the girl left, Hank wondered aloud if all sellers were like this. Then he took out his pills from Kent and decided to sell them next time. But upon hearing his words, the deity became very angry. She was surprised at his audacity and declared that she would not allow it. The hero closed his ears so as not to hear her anymore. The great king continued his path to conquer the city. In the next house, he killed several masked creatures, when suddenly his hand began to tremble from a jar of pills. It was Kent. She claimed that the pills would not leave him even if he threw them away. She was angry that he allowed the thought of selling her gift and wanted to punish him. Hank was also angry because she handed them to him of her own free will, so she can take them and get lost if something doesn't suit her. Then he took out his tickets and wanted to call the seller to sell them, but she appreciated his rebellious spirit, and her heart almost jumped out of her chest. Suddenly, the system checked the faith buffer and carried out the punishment for violating the rule. Hank asked if she shared the pain with him. The punishment was an eye for an eye. The deity was happy and explained that this all happened because of his essence. Then the guy decided to make the pain even more painful and was about to tear off the ticket. But he felt a strange pain from the bottle of pills. It went through his body like lightning, preventing him from calling the seller. Kent stated that she could customize the system for him. The tablets turned out to be a living creature and caught the moment to escape from Hank's hand. The hero chased after the can, surprised that the element could move on its own, but they fell into the hands of the guard. He took several at once and immediately began to transform into a huge, crazy monster. The guy asked for status, but the man's hand was on his face. Still holding the guy, he slammed him into the ground and then tore out a huge column of concrete and threw it at him. Hank managed to jump out from under it and then found himself in the air above the man. He used a brutal kick and killed the Bemore man and received coins for it. Having finished the fight, the guy looked back. As he was trying to find where the pills had gone again, they were again trying to run away from him. The hero heard someone shouting that there was an intruder here. so he used his abilities to jump along the walls of houses, still trying to catch up with the pills. On the way, the Bemurians overtook him. He quickly dealt with them so as not to miss his element. They jumped off the cliff and he followed them. Meanwhile, Hannah stood surrounded by many bloody corpses. They attacked her, and then the mineral inside her melted them all. The girl was trying to realize that she had killed so many people, when suddenly someone touched her shoulder. Turning around, she saw Taurus's face. She did not expect this and screamed in fright, but it turned out to be Heinrich. He wanted to make fun of her, and at the same time he appreciated her, because he had previously considered her useless. Together they went out onto the city street. The bell rang. This was a notification about a new announcement, which everyone who was there received. It was about Hank. For a large reward it was offered to capture a non-Christian who had entered the Holy Land. Anyone could take part. The residents really wanted to get so many coins for capturing a stranger. A competition began. Then Henry and Hannah ran to look for their friend in order to prevent him from being captured. New Moon didn't expect things to develop so quickly. He was afraid that if things continued like this, the entire city would become their enemy. Hank made his way through the destroyed walls. He was covered in blood. Then he found someone's dagger, but unfortunately it was not suitable for absorption. He then remembered that he had one more element left in his bag. He took out the corsage and ate it, using the code word, and his wounds were healed. Jumping into the abyss, the guy landed in the very center, where the defenders of the city were looking for him. One of them cut his cheek with his trident. Suddenly he saw a bottle of pills lying on the road. He went up and took them, but they were no longer as active as before. Hank noticed that they had calmed down. He assumed that they had some specific goal. Looking around, he noticed images of eyes on the wall. The drawing was located above the entrance to the temple. A blue light emanated from there. The guy decided to go inside. The bright glow interfered with his view. He saw a certain glass cabinet. It was the one that gave off such a bright color. The cabinet itself was inside a huge stone statue. The guy assumed that it was a divine object. It looked like claws, a pair of moon sickles, a long curved blade, and double handles. Hank remembered Henry's words that Aruga's divine objects were kept in the city. The great king had used it in a past life and was even able to kill the god with them. He tried to touch the screen, but was immediately shocked by multiple shocks, followed by a loud alarm sound. Residents of the city heard the signal and realized that it was coming from the treasure palace. Then they en masse decided to go there to capture the guy. The hero again decided to touch the cabinet, but this time he kept his hand on the glass for a long time. He screamed from the pain caused by the electric discharges, but he had no access to the object. The guy's entire hand was badly burned. Suddenly, God Aruga spoke to him. He called Hank a fool and also assured that his desires would destroy him. Realizing that he was unable to fight the god's essence, he decided to run away to find an item to absorb and further heal. God warned him that he was being hunted, but Hank ran outside anyway and was confronted by an angry crowd who wanted to kill him for a reward. The crowd was already aiming to attack, but one of them recognized the great king in the guy's face. Meanwhile, he was holding his charred hand. The villagers began to argue whether they should kill the guy now, but if they captured him, they would receive coins. Someone wanted his essence, but already had two. One daredevil decided to be the first to try to attack the king, since the others had been chatting for too long. But before he even got halfway, he was torn apart by a man in a scarf and mask. Only with a wave of his hand did he manage to tear the man's flesh into two parts. The madman declared that Hank was his prey. The hero had no idea what awaited him, and he had no fear at all. He admired how the old man hit the man right in the bull's eye. A resident in a mask and a red robe attacked Hank first. Then he was joined by a second in a blue robe. Everyone decided that he was using a splitting technique. The second attacker took out a metal round sledgehammer and struck the hero in the face with it, causing blood to spray from his mouth and nose. He dealt another blow, causing the guy to curl up in pain. Getting ready to hit again, he was stopped by his twin, declaring that the guy would die. They sent a report on the completion of the mission to the high priest, and after that, concrete blocks began to grow from the ground in front of them. A giant staircase appeared that led to the temple, and at the top of it stood the high priest Ronald. He was dressed in a cassock. Ronald began his speech by saying that the god's land had been desecrated by an invading infidel, which enraged the god Arug. Those who captured the attacker were promised a reward, and the criminal faced severe punishment from Aruga. Ronald decided to carry out a ritual of purification with the blood of the sinner himself, since the land of God was desecrated, then ordered Hank to be brought. Two masked men took the hero by the arms and led him to the priest, but they were stopped by a huge guard. He allowed only one of them to rise, since he was the one who grabbed the sinner. The remaining masked man in the red outfit was ordered not to move, and guards stood around him with spears pointed at him. Ronald approached the glass box, bowed to it, and asked permission to use the divine object. The glass dissipated and the sickles could be taken. This is the greatest treasure among Aruga's sun divine objects. They are proof of the existence of God. The priest was indignant that a non-Christian dared to encroach on them, and also that he should not count on mercy. Hank couldn't get up, so he crawled up the stairs. The guard forced him to stand so as not to waste the priest's time, and then stuck the tip of the spear into his arm. The hero immediately recognized the metal object and said the command to absorb it. His wounds immediately healed. He rose to his feet and killed the guard with one kick, glad that he could finally destroy everything here. Then Heinrich crawled out from under the blue robe. He encouraged his comrade while he rushed upstairs. The guard came to his senses. The man tried to stop the hero, but New Moon prevented his attack and struck with his foot, causing him to fly upward with great speed. The guards ran to the top to stop the invaders, but they were surrounded by sharp spikes, which then pierced their bodies as Hannah activated her witch essence. Hank continued to climb the stairs. The high priest was furious that the heretic dared to cause chaos in the main temple. For this sin, he aimed to cut the throat and tear out the hero's heart with the help of divine sickles. He was preparing to attack the guy. The hero jumped over him and then, delivering a brutal kick, beheaded the clergyman. Tears flowed from the guard's eyes as soon as he saw Ronald's murder. The man tried to go upstairs to kill the guy, but the master was ahead of him. He jumped on him and punched a hole in the ground with him. Henry was furious and shouted at them. Because of them, he was forced to hit his friend. This was their plan if a foreigner was discovered infiltrating the city. The guys decided to be the first to find and capture Hank, and then take him to the tower so that he could destroy the heart of the city in one fell swoop. New Moon was angry that he had to hit the hero. He activated an essence that intensifies in proportion to the remaining level of anger. He wanted to beg Hank's forgiveness. In anger, he began to destroy everything around him, injuring himself. The guy was covered in blood and apologized to the hero. The great king approached the bloodied Henry and stopped him, taking him by the hand. The guy asked if he had dealt well with the guard. The younger brother began asking question after question. He wondered if Hank was going to eat the swords, if he had gotten hurt, and also noticed that they suited him very well. He saw that the hero was stained with his blood. He apologized and asked him not to come closer until he washed it off him. But Hank put his hand on his head and praised him for his actions, which made the guy crazy happy. He started screaming again, happy to be praised and acknowledged by the hero. He was absolutely delighted and tried to get everyone's attention to share the news. The king again remembered Chester's words, that people whose minds were clouded during the hunt in the New World are beasts. He tried to think about what he should do with the new moon in the future. Then the incredible happened. The voice of the god Arug appeared. He was angry that these heretics dared to desecrate his holy land. He began activating the transmigration of the soul. The priest raised his head and placed it on his shoulders. The deity was about to punish the unbelievers. His body began to transform. The guards noticed the appearance of the god. They fell to their knees and began to bow to him in reverence. They all praised his name. Aruga descended from heaven. Heinrich was delighted with his arrival, while Hank was completely unable to comprehend what was happening. The young man remembered that everything happened exactly as it happened to him when he was a believer. His body became an intermediary. Thousands of huge hands with fingers appeared out of nowhere. They grabbed all the guards, who took it as an honor to give up their soul and body. Aruga threw them all into his huge mouth and devoured them. People continued to chant his name. They were glad to die at his hands. Heinrich noticed that all the people were brainwashed. Their faith turned out to be deeper than it might seem at first glance. Hank called them crazy. The huge mouth then grew into a huge worm with a human jaw. It continued to eat every person in its path. Some began to run away. The residents screamed in complete confusion. They thought that the test was over with the murder of the high priest. It was not possible to overcome such a thing. They believed that there was only one person who would be able to defeat this new monster, and his name was the Great King. Remembering that last time, he also saved them, calling them to free themselves from the place where they were bullied, inviting them to follow him. Hannah did not share everyone's enthusiasm. People encouraged Hank to fight the deity, but she was sure that they wanted the guy dead. But the hero was already climbing the stairs again. He activated his second essence beyond the horizon, and for one thing, he received a cult of his personality. The basic conditions for obtaining were fulfilled, and the legend of Hank's existence began. He began to understand who the gods really are. He considered them pitiful beings with intelligence who passed the final test and then demanded access to god status, which they received in the game. The guy believed that Aruga should not be proud of his title, because none of those who get rid of their followers whenever he pleases are worthy of the title of god. He called such creatures none other than monsters. The monster with the soul of Aruga roared at the thought that a mere mortal dared to mock him. He called his body the sun god. He had a flame that could burn the entire universe. His rage was great. He longed to kill the guy. The deity sent a stream of flame towards Hank, thereby melting the earth. The guy could not call him either god or devil, but only a monster. The city began to burn. Stones fell around from the blows of the god. Hannah protected herself in a shell sphere, but she barely resisted the flames. The girl was annoyed that he was behaving ignorantly there. Heinrich approached her. He was sure that since Hank called God a monster, it means he can be killed. She asked if he had seen the king, but it seemed obvious to him that the guy had gone to deal with Aruga. The power of a god depends on the vessel in which he resides, so the gods choose stronger vessels, but Aruga chose quantity over quality. The result is an incredibly powerful creature, but the more power he uses, the more blood vessels he needs. Otherwise, he will begin to weaken. Heinrich was confident that they had a chance to win, but now they could only prevent Hank from achieving his goal. The guy noticed that now this is not the person she is used to, so she should not interfere with the battle of the Great King. But suddenly he decided to go with her if she wanted. He had a plan brewing to help Hank win the battle with the monster. The hero noticed that the creature's body was becoming smaller. As Heinrich had told him, he heard from a distance how his body was being destroyed. Although it was huge, it was done poorly. The guy decided to stack the coins until the monster's strength ran out. He also noticed an innovation, power points, but did not know what they meant. Hank began offensive movements, but quickly realized that the monster was blocking the approach to itself with stones. Suddenly, Heinrich appeared next to him, carrying Hannah on him. She was not very happy about this. The guy offered to have fun. First, he decided to help clear the road. But the king did not want to involve them in this battle and ordered them to run away from here. The monster threw a huge beam of light at them. New Moon was still holding the girl on his shoulders. She was screaming, asking him to let her go. Hank was also nervous. He was afraid that the monster would harm them. Unexpectedly, Aruga released a huge purple flame from his chest. Scared, the guy let go of the girl. She was very scared and annoyed at the same time. But her father did not leave her, asking her not to worry, since the jade stone inside her could repel any blows, which Henry took advantage of, using the girl as a shield. Her internal defense worked perfectly. There was no trace of hellfire on the guys. Then the master decided to use her ability to repel the attack. He quickly moved, holding her and sending rays in the other direction. The guy was very happy that his hopes for her talent were justified. He threw her up to celebrate, noting that Hannah was a useful player. The monster Aruga was running out of strength. He was melting before our eyes. His faith was weakening. He urgently needed believers to absorb. His teeth began to fall out and his eyes bulged out of their sockets. He sent them in search of prey, demanding to find people. Hank was completely disappointed that Heinrich did not keep his promise and did not protect the girl, but the guy objected to him. He pointed to the bright stone in the middle of Hannah's chest, a green-yellow mineral made of shimmering jade. It is the girl's second essence. The hero remembered how her father told him about this, but New Moon doubted the power of the element. He suspected that it absorbs light and stores magical power. Her first essence, capable of creating absolutely any objects at will with the help of magical power. Its essences combined perfectly with each other. He also assumed that the mineral was now filled to capacity with the magical power of Aruga's ray of light. But Hannah was already tired of the guy constantly using her as he wanted without her permission. She forbade him to do this, being very offended. Suddenly, one of the monster's eyes appeared in front of her. He looked at the girl, and then he shot a beam of light at her, which instantly reflected from her stone, and she didn't even notice the attack, trying to close her eyes from the brightness. Hank asked if she was okay. She answered in the affirmative, but also noticed that they were surrounded by many monster eyes. They fired rays of light at the guys, trying to kill them, but Heinrich managed to react in time. He again grabbed the girl and ran around the hero at high speed, using her as a human shield. Hannah no longer had any strength. She could barely breathe, and New Moon suggested that they leave the city right away since Hank didn't have to. He was sure that the entire city was the vessel of this monster. They worshipped him, and he devoured them in order to gain strength and would do so until he killed the hero. Aruga continued to catch his believers, then he put them into his mouth and his size grew incredibly. The monster demanded that everyone bow before him. His huge hands scoured the streets of the city and grabbed people running away and screaming in fear. His fingers and palms also had jaws that could eat a person, which they did successfully. People did not understand why they had to go through this if the test was over. Residents of the city rushed to the main gate, but it was locked. Since all the guards had been killed, they knocked on the doors, asking to be let out. One of the girls cried from fear and doom. She thought that their only way out was to pray, but her friend was surprised at her impulse, since there was no one to ask. The townspeople turned to the tower. They could watch their village being destroyed, thick smoke from the fire pouring out. Even though they didn't know who to pray to, their only salvation was Hank, who was ready to attack the monster, his faith points growing exponentially. Hannah was already tired of being a shield. She began to rage and scream at the eyes running everywhere. She wanted to be left alone. She was crushing them with her foot when Hank asked them to be ready. He was going to destroy them all at once. The girl asked if he had a plan on how to do this. Then he asked her to lend him her strength. He could not understand why this was happening, but he felt that his strength was overwhelming him. He was sure that he would definitely not lose. At the same time, the monster only became bigger and angrier. It burned with fire and destroyed everything in its path. It demanded that the Gentiles return the divine object to him. Hank raised the sword to show off his prize, although he had not yet used it, but he would try to defeat Aruga with it. Heinrich was filled with confidence that the hero would succeed. Even though he had lost his memory, his body remembered everything. Hank thought so too. The monster was burning with rage. They decided to start the battle. The guy asked Hannah if she was ready. The girl began to accumulate all her energy in order to then spread it to the king. She tried to release the light and strengthen the magical power. The enraged deity Aruga tried to get there. Hank decided to give Kent temporary access to his body, and the power was unlocked. The great king began with a frantic martial arts dance as he circled around the monster, inflicting countless wounds on it. He used sickles in his attack, calling Aruga to disappear. The weapon was forged in fire and caused the monster unbearable pain. The deity could no longer resist. He burned alive in his own streams of fire. Then Hank dealt the final blow, jumping into the very whirlpool. A powerful explosion occurred, which finally destroyed the monster, covering Hannah with the blast wave. New Moon watched from the side as the smoke slowly dissipated. The girl was completely exhausted, but fortunately the main test was completed, and the incarnation of the god Aruga lost. The guys began to call Hank. He was next to the monsters at the time of the explosion, which left a huge crater in front of the tower. Suddenly Heinrich grabbed the girl by the throat. He was looking for any elements that had at least some class. He was in a hurry and did not have time to explain. Trying to pull the green-yellow mineral out of her chest, he hurt the girl very much. Tears rolled from her eyes. She could not scream, since his other hand tightly covered her mouth. Suddenly they noticed that people began to throw all their weapons into one common pile. They offered to give everything to Hank. Heinrich collected all the items in a bag and carried them to the crater, followed by the others, and the figure of a burnt man appeared from the smoke. The guys quickly went down the funnel to meet Hank. He came out all blackened and with burnt hair, holding sickles in his hands. Hannah was very happy to see that he was alive. Tears appeared in her eyes. The girl wanted to hug the guy, but was afraid that she would hurt him. Heinrich considered all her emotions useless and advised the girl to discard them and finally give the hero elements, otherwise he would remain in place. Suddenly an angel appeared behind them. It was Michael. He did not expect the guy to be so good and exceed all his expectations. He still thought Hank was an entertaining boy, praising him for lasting so long against a dangerous opponent. Suddenly an angel of power appeared behind them. Everyone stared at him. The hero still held the swords in his hands, and he was ready to use them again if necessary. Castiel flew in to congratulate Hank on his victory in the battle. The hero overcame the main test, so he becomes the new master of the Holy Land of Katla. He then sent his blessings to the new god in the person of Hank, thereby healing his wounds and returning him to his former appearance. People began to come closer and closer to look at the new deity. They surrounded the guys and just stood in silence. From that moment on, the Holy Land and believers entrusted all their desires to the hero, since he fulfilled all the conditions and was worthy to be called a god. This area was only part of Aruga's lands, and Hank exiled his incarnation, so in fact the conditions for granting land ownership were not met. But Castiel wanted to give the guy what he deserved, so he decided to use the power on behalf of the main god. He then asked what Holy Land Hank would like to receive. He thought for a moment, but knew for sure that he wanted one where people would not kill each other. He also didn't want to have anything to do with monsters and people with animal instincts anymore, like one of his days in his past life with Gina. Suddenly he found himself where he dreamed of being. There was a lot of greenery around, small houses adjacent to high-rise buildings. Hannah also appeared in Hank's new world. She ran up to him from behind and hid behind the hero's strong back. He asked how she was doing. The girl felt fine, but there was not a soul around them anymore. They had the feeling that they were alone there. Henry appeared in front of them out of nowhere. He was surprised that there really were no killings in the new Holy Land, and there was also no place for animals. He felt a little lost since he couldn't get into town to see Hank, so he said goodbye to them and promised to see them next time. The newly created god did not think that his words would be taken so literally. He tried to stop the new moon, but it was too late. The hero regretted that he had desired such a holy land for himself. In the very center of the new city, there was a tower. A fence was built along the periphery. There were also mountains. Instead of asphalt, all the roads were covered with grass and trees. Everything here reminded the hero of the world before the test, except that there was nothing else here. All the cafes were empty. In this city, the very existence of animals was prohibited. These are people who went crazy during the education, which made them aggressive. The guy wondered in his head if this city was a reflection of his actual desires. Suddenly, an announcement appeared about the first offender. The punishment was expulsion from the city. Hank threw his bag and ran as fast as he could to the gate. He saw two men and a woman with a child in her arms running along the desert sands in his direction, but a huge, devouring worm crawled out of the ground. The new god hurried the people, shouted to them not to stop and to run with all their strength. The worm had almost caught up with them. Then the man decided to kick the woman so that she would fall along with the child, thereby giving him a chance to run to the city this time. The monster overtook the mother and child, and he continued to run, but by killing them, he violated the first law. The system recognized him as mentally ill and expelled him. Hannah also approached the disappointed Hank. She noticed that she had already seen this man several times, but as she approached the gate, everything disappeared. The hero understood that as long as a person has an animal essence he cannot enter, he was transported to another place, because he chose such a law for the Holy Land. The guys went into Hank's former apartment. They connected the electricity generator. Then the guy turned on his laptop and sat down on the sofa. He also decided to visit his university. Everything there was as he remembered. But the guy could not forget Heinrich. He was thinking about how to get him back. Meanwhile, Hannah was taking a bath. The girl was delighted to finally wash herself. She had not had such an opportunity for a long time. Noticing that the only thing missing was beer, she sat down next to him. Hank had already changed into his usual clothes, and the girl was only wearing his t-shirt, and the guy asked her not to sit next to him like that. The guy's laptop was open, and the girl asked if he had watched a movie on it, since she also wanted to, and voluntarily opened one of the folders. But instead of a movie, She came across an adult movie. Hank felt a sense of shame and tried to deny that these were not his files, while Hannah tried to quickly delete the shameful information. Suddenly, the girl asked him an unexpected question. She was interested in why she didn't disappear either, because she also went through enlightenment, and she killed people with her abilities. Her powers scared her as they acted uncontrollably and caused a lot of pain to people. She also thought that she would have to become a beast in order to survive. Hannah liked this city because here she could finally forget about such thoughts and no longer be afraid that she would kill someone. Out of the blue, Hank suggested something to eat to improve the mood. He took out chicken noodles and suggested leaving the discussion and finally watching a movie. They chose which movie to watch, turned it on. They experienced the whole range of emotions and feelings. They ate soup, laughed, and cried. The girl began to fall asleep, leaning on the guy's shoulder. He was concerned that she would catch a cold. He said that he would sleep in the bed, and Hannah decided to lie down in a sleeping bag to restore her mental strength. She laughed embarrassedly because the sleeping bag smelled like Hank. That's exactly what the girl was counting on. He decided to go out for some fresh air. But instead of falling asleep, she opened the laptop again and started looking at the guy's photos, finding a girl's photo. Getting jealous, she closed the screen. Going outside, Hank received a notification that faith points, which turned people's faith into strength, had grown again. The guy reasoned that perhaps Heinrich and the people who disappeared then were looking for him. Instead of appreciating those who were nearby and supported, he only thought about how to survive. He also wanted to understand why most people are crazy geeks and animals. But there are also normal ones. Like Chester, he thought about how to return the old world in order to live with them. The hero remembered how Gina told him that the great king must lead people to kill the main god. Hank got the idea to call the salesman Marie. She immediately came to him, but he just looked at her and was silent. Then she became curious about what he wanted from her. And then Hank was able to confess to her that he was planning to kill God. She was dumbfounded by this news and asked if he was serious or not. The arms dealer was extremely frightened by the hero's desire. She definitely did not expect to hear these words from him, and then yelled at the guy. Marie wondered why she was being punished, and also considered Hank's decision stupid, because if the angels heard, they would not leave her alone. But Kent was inspired by the hero's determination. She knew that he was strong, then adding that he excites her with his persistence. The girl noticed the goddess, and with undisguised admiration recognized her as the goddess of pleasure, Mrs. Kent. Hank tried to drive away the deity, simultaneously asking her to shut up, since she was only complicating everything. She pretended that she had not seen or heard anything and would not tell anyone anything. He promised Marie that if she stayed, he would not regret it. He was going to give her all the divine objects that he could get. For example, he wanted to give her the paired Aruga moon sickles for sale, which he had just won in a battle with God. The girl immediately showed interest. She took the blades to verify the authenticity of the items. Their molecular structure was like that of a supernova. Marie clarified whether he used the daggers to kill the deity. Hank confirmed her guesses and asked if she could sell them at all. The merchant asked the guy to wait a minute, took out her phone, dialed the number of the Sellers Association, then said that her client had a high-end item. She also confirmed to them that this was the original, and then apologized to the hero since she had to leave for a while for a consultation. She was gone for only a few seconds. When she returned, she looked very pleased. The guy asked her what they had told her in the community. To begin with, she was told to make a deal, and in exchange, she was promoted from a novice salesman to a special status peddler. The girl was very happy with this news and was very proud of herself, because now she had the right to buy high-class items. The process of promotion to a special class began. Marie disappeared in a bright burst of light, and then her appearance began to transform and her clothes changed. In her new image, the girl was ready to buy even his heart, but Hank was a little uncomfortable with the way she flirted with him. Realizing that he was in no mood to joke, she suggested that they get down to business. First of all, they provide a high-quality element for free. She took out a magic ball, then held it out in her hand in front of the king and invited him to choose whatever he liked. Hank was surprised that such a thing existed. The catalog included high-end and super high-end items supplied by top-notch sellers. He wanted to ask the girl a question. She was ready to answer anything except personal information. Then he asked if she knew the source of God's power. Marie was stunned, but replied that the source of strength is fear. Not all people sincerely follow the deity from the very beginning. But when they see the miracles they perform, they have no choice but to bow their heads in recognition of the difference in power. People captivated by miracles gain faith. They retell stories, making legends out of them. Ultimately, by shackling people with fear, God gains power. After her story, Hank thought about fear, asking for status. He learned that the faith item was added to the status window after the battle with Aruga. He believed that there must be a reason why the meter, which had reset to 0 due to the use of power in battle, was rising again. Starting to look at the catalog of possible gifts, he stuck his hand into the window and took out an amulet of a frog that collects and absorbs without restrictions, which was simply created for storing food. Then he remembered the pills and offered to buy them too. Marie was delighted with the divine object and agreed. She had just begun to thank him when suddenly the curse began to be placed on the pills, one after another, almost non-stop. After the curse was cast, the girl was very frightened. She began to frantically pack her bag, simultaneously apologizing for her arrogant behavior. The revived pills laughed at her, and Hank found out that it was Kent, and Marie refused to buy them and said that she was closing her shop. The hero did not insist. The guy returned to the room and fell asleep, and in the morning Hannah woke him up. She climbed onto his bed in her short and tight nightie and said that something was happening outside. He received a notification that a large number of lawbreakers had been discovered. The punishment was expulsion, but people continued on their way and approached the gate. Realizing that something was planned, they began to run, trying to get there first, pushing everyone around. But when approaching the gate, everyone disappeared. Hank watched what was happening. He was surprised that so many people wanted to get into his city. Hannah did not understand where they were coming from. Two men in the crowd had an argument. They desperately tried to enter, but immediately after one of them stabbed the other, they both disappeared into a portal of bright light. The hero continued to watch the people coming again and again. Their number did not decrease, but none of them could get inside. He did not understand what was happening and where they all came from. Meanwhile, 2 kilometers southeast of the Holy Land of Katla, a sand hotel was built between the rocks and contained a train for crossing the desert. The man in the eye patch lit a cigar. He is the head of the expedition of Aruga believers, Leon. He asked others how the situation was. He was informed that everyone who entered the city on the Holy Land had not yet been identified, and everyone who unsuccessfully tried to enter was being moved to another location. Deputy Chief Keanu continued, according to eyewitnesses from Katla, the first Holy Land of Aruga will be captured by that person. God's believers are scattered across continents, but most of them have been used up, and the territory has been captured by the enemy. The number of remaining Bamurians was negligible, as was the likelihood that Aruga's incarnation could escape. He considered their expedition mission to be extremely important. One of the girls in the army shared with her friend standing next to her that she really liked Hank. They looked at each other and smiled at each other. Leon heard their conversation. He approached the one who was talking about the hero and then demanded that she take out her tongue and put out his cigar on it. The head became very angry when he heard the name of the king. He ordered her never to say this name again, otherwise he would sew her mouth shut, and he would feed her cut-off tongue to the dogs. The girl covered her mouth with her hands and cried in pain. He did not understand how someone like Hank could be called a god. Then he decided to speak in front of his large army. In his army there were more than 6,000 people, as well as volunteers from the inhabitants of Bamura. All of them stood before him in their ammunition and fully armed. He informed them that according to available information, there were only 2 in cattle, Hank and Hannah, and he also forbade comparing the hero to a god, because without powers he considered it an empty title. They managed to take out and save some of the divine objects in Aruga's blessing. They lay on the back of the car and were carefully covered with a cloth. Their plan was to surround and besiege Katla and place 3 divine objects around the city's fence. And after that they were going to, together with the main army, destroy this semblance of a god in the person of Hank. Then the commander-in-chief shouted that in this way, this land would be in their power again. In order to receive status and reward from the Holy Land, Everyone in the army, as well as the volunteers, had to immediately take up arms, because they were in the territory of God. Meanwhile, on the beach near the hero's new city, there were people. A man in uniform was looking at the gate through binoculars, a girl was lying under an umbrella, and there was also a saddled chicken with them. The girl asked the subordinate if he could see the smoke signal, since they had wasted a bunch of slaves, but so far not a single person had been able to enter. Chloe, the head of the scouts, complained about the intense heat. She wanted to quickly finish everything and get out of there. The assistant opened a bottle of wine and poured it into her glass. He hoped that the device they sent would comply with the terms of the new law, since no one else knew about its hidden status. But Chloe believed that the new god himself had directly said that he wanted to get rid of the animals, although she was curious whether he himself was clean. In such a hell that has come to this world, a simple boy would not have survived. But even before enlightenment, the same thing was happening in the world, the girl shared. Judging by history, she thought that the beast was the true essence of man, and the current Katla was just the grumbling of an idealist. At the same time, Hank seemed to her like a hypocrite who couldn't open his eyes. She wanted to destroy his new reality and kill him. The gates to the new city opened. A blonde boy in torn clothes walked through them. The guys were very happy about the new resident. They were glad to receive him. Finally, among the crowd of animals, a man could reach them. The boy looked tired. Hank squatted down in front of him. He introduced himself to him, and then inquired if he had come alone, and also where his parents were. But instead of answering, the boy said that he was ready, which put the guys into a stupor. Then he opened his coat, and there was an improvised explosive device. His finger was on the detonator. The boy no longer looked tired or upset. He was glad that he was the first citizen, and then he pressed the button and a powerful explosion occurred. Chloe's assistant reported that he had a video of a smoke signal. The girl immediately jumped out of the chair and was ready to move out immediately, and the assistant asked her to come back and prepare her a bath. The girl happily demonstrated her essence. Instead of hands, she had long ribbons with sharp spikes and an arrow at the end. She was eager to have fun. The car with divine items and Aruga's blessing moved out from its hiding place in the mountains. They were heading to Katla. Fortunately, Hannah managed to use her protective ball ability, so she and Hank were not harmed. The Bemurians began to beat the drums. They stood on a mobile platform next to the gate, and the machine also brought and unloaded divine objects to the given positions. Leon ordered the destruction of everything in the new city, but indicated that the tower in the center of the Holy Land should not be touched. He was very serious. They fired a destructive column of bright purple light. The commander and deputy were pleased as the projectile hit the target. Everything around was in a cloud of dust. When the horizon cleared a little, the guys saw that the city wall had been destroyed. Deputy Keanu informed the chief that the outer wall had been destroyed. Leon was happy and noted that the rest of the walls had also fallen. The head of the expedition of believers shouted and ordered not to stop and to continue shelling the city until they got tired. Everyone who tried to enter the city was most likely killed. Suddenly, a man covered in blood crawled out from behind the stones. He asked them why they didn't let them in, but a ray of light came again. Hannah became worried about possible other survivors. She rushed to open the gate. She was afraid that they would all be torn apart, and it was better to move them to another place than to leave them here. Destructive rays of light hit the city again and again, destroying residential buildings, and thick black smoke came from everywhere. Hannah was very indignant because they continued to destroy buildings and the entire city. She did not understand why they would do this. But most of all, she was upset about other things, such as the fact that she didn't have time to finish watching the drama, or about her plans to plant a vegetable garden. She also dreamed that when there were more children, they would plow the land together and discuss the harvest of pumpkins and potatoes. Every year she would hold a festival for everyone. Families who had children would be congratulated, and everyone would be jealous of their friendly group. The girl began to cry because in their city you cannot kill and everyone must follow this one rule. Hank decided to support his friend, putting his hand on her shoulder, and also promising that her dream would definitely come true. But then he invited her not to wait for this to happen, but to go to meet her. He took out a certain object and released purple fog from there, which transformed the hero and changed him into a uniform. Kent appeared again. She stared at the guy and then said that it was her gift to him. She slightly improved it. He didn't mind, because in a sense he is a god like her. She continued to whisper to him, offering to turn this place into their joint temple, and also asked him to gather as many believers as possible so that they could fight together against everyone. Hank didn't want to hear what she had to say again, so he threw her off and then called Hannah to go behind the wall together. They were immediately attacked by Chloe with her chains with sharp tips. The hero was able to dodge them, but the girl launched them again. She was glad that they had finally met. It was not easy for her to organize a meeting with him. She knew that for this it was necessary to destroy everything. Suddenly she smiled an ominous smile, crossing her sword arms, and told the hero that nothing had changed, but Hank did not understand what she was talking about. The girl laughed. She remembered that he did not remember anything. She decided to explain to him that last time during the Enlightenment he had a group of cowards and pacifists, and then they all hid in a cave. But then they were plundered, and all the people were killed, and Chloe decided to admit that it was she who organized that bloody massacre and killed everyone with her own hands. Then she remembered about one person, a man who, no matter how much you killed, he continued to resurrect. Hannah realized that she was talking about her father. The girl became enraged when she heard that it was Chloe who was involved in the murder of everyone in the camp, and her willpower began to rapidly decrease. Tears came to her eyes, grabbing her spears. She threw them at the head of the scouts, and she welcomed her to the world of animals. Chloe continued to swing her chains and surrounded Hannah with them, who had difficulty breaking free from them. Hank feared for the life of his friend, whom he promised to protect. Hannah was very angry. She had a bestial grin, but Hank managed to jump to her and took the brunt of the spikes on himself, covering the girl with himself. Even though the main character put all his coins into protection, he was still in great pain from the sharp chain cutting into the skin of his hands. Suddenly, Hannah broke down. She started screaming and tried to escape, but the guy held her and asked her to calm down because she was being provoked, but thereby inflicted even deeper wounds on himself. But the girl remembered how many people Chloe had hurt, how many she had killed, how many dead bodies were lying in the shelter then. The chains penetrated the skin more and more. Then Hank grabbed them and pulled them towards himself. The head of the scouts could not resist, and the hero decided to try to absorb the iron. As soon as he said the code word, all the chains and spikes immediately disappeared, including from Chloe's hands. But instead of healing, they only made his wounds worse. It was a bloody bomb. The head of the intelligence officer was happy that he had activated his essence. She noted that even if the guy was hungry, he should not eat anything. It tasted very spicy. Hank was bleeding, but then he noticed a pond behind her. He continued to come up with a plan to escape while the girl mocked him, hinting at her spicy taste. Chloe pulled out her chains again and threw them at the heroes, but the guy used the spring and crazy dance technique and used water from the lake. He took off with Hannah in his arms, covering himself with the flow of water, leaving behind huge waves that mixed with sand from the desert. The opponent was covered by just such a wave of sand, and she found herself covered in it, and in a strange position. She was very irritated because of this. Shaking herself off, she decided to try attaching another weapon to her hands. This time she pulled out pistols from their holsters. The indignant and enraged girl realized that the guys could escape, so she went in search of them, simultaneously promising to tear off their arms and legs when they met. Hank brought Hannah to the cave. He wanted to know how she was feeling and asked her to come to her senses, but she continued to puff with anger, remembering their past life. She remembered how they used to communicate in the hideout, how she cut her father's hair, or how she tried to calm a crying child. But all her wonderful memories of life in the previous world were overshadowed by hundreds of bodies killed at the hands of the head of the scouts. Hank tried to calm her down, but she kept screaming, intending to take revenge for them all. The guy tried to convince her that everything was fine now. Tears flowed from her eyes. She remembered her childhood, when she sat little in her father's arms, and he promised to protect her. The hero understood that he could not cope, as the girl began to give up and decided to use the ticket to call the seller Marie. She immediately drew attention to his cuirass, which she liked at the very beginning, but Hank did not waste time and immediately asked if she had a good item to stabilize her psyche. The merchant was a little upset, since most of them allow interference with the mind and hide the status, so they are sold illegally and you can get arrested. But the guy didn't have time to listen to her objections. He once again asked whether she had such a product or not, and only then did she start looking for it in the catalog. She was able to find a nomadic headdress that protected from harm. If she put it on, all her thoughts would return to normal. Marie put a hat on the girl and was sitting at her bedside, when suddenly Hank decided to leave and asked her to look after Hannah while he was gone. She didn't want to stay there without protection, but she still agreed to provide a special service to a big client, because their desire is law for her. The guy came out of the cave. He hit the stones hard with his fist. He couldn't understand why he was so weak if they said about him that he was like a god. He remembered Chester's words, his request to take care of his daughter. The only thing he wanted was for her to survive, and the hero was a benefactor for them, but he doubted that anything had changed since the moment when he lost the battles. When suddenly Chloe appeared from behind the rock, she laughed because she had caught God flagellating himself. She reminded him of the words that if he was in unbearable pain, then she could gladly help and kill him. She raised her right hand, from which a long pistol was sticking out, and began to fire at the hero, but instead of bullets, only her blood flew around. Hank decided to take advantage of the essence. He raised a sandstorm, thus catching the moment in order to activate his blades instead of his feet. Jumping out of the sand, he sharply ran the blade across the girl's body, but instead of fear, she continued to encourage him and asked him to strike more blows. Chloe has masochistic tendencies. She took pleasure in the fact that he hurt her. She screamed enthusiastically and asked to continue, although her body was already cut up. But just as Hank prepared to give her another cut, she threw out her chain and caught the tip of it on the rock, and then climbed up. But the guy still managed to run his dagger along her body, causing blood to spurt out of her wound and onto the hero as well. Then Chloe activated her essence, and immediately after that there was another explosion. Hank was badly injured. He lay on his back and groaned. The girl was not injured, although she still had the cuts inflicted by the hero and blood was flowing from them. She was unhappy that the guy was not moving, although he calls himself a god. Noticing the mark of the goddess of pleasure on his cheek, she licked it, noting that he himself was just a slave of a mad god. Chloe was already completely on top of Hank. Her dagger entered his hand. He could not move. The girl believed that he was only pretending to be innocent and called him a hypocrite. She was going to cut off his arms and legs and then hang him in the room. She wondered if he would be able to make any sound. The girl wanted revenge for what he did to her in the past enlightenment. He cut off her legs, wanting everything returned to him tenfold. The hero asked with a smile on his face what kind of humiliation she was talking about. Was there anything between them? He couldn't remember that. Chloe, although angry, continued to burst into laughter. She liked that he was so arrogant and she could no longer restrain herself. Everything inside her was burning. Hank was bleeding. He couldn't move. She was going to chop him into mince and expose him to holy ground. Her blood was very dangerous. She used her blood bomb ability, but suddenly the hero stood up and grabbed her. The girl was surprised that he was still able to move. Then there was an explosion that even her swimsuit was badly burned. But literally the next moment he cut off her head and her hand, the girl fell dead. Hank also lay covered in blood. With the last of his strength, the hero took out from his pocket his amulet of a frog, a glutton that can collect and absorb elements without restrictions. Then he uttered a code word. Meanwhile, Leon scolded his subordinates from the army. He ordered them to shoot without stopping and did not understand why they stopped. The employee was very frightened by such an attack. He apologized and tried to justify that all the weapons overheated due to continuous operation. He also said that the weapon needs a little time to cool down, otherwise it could explode and destroy everything around. Leon pushed the guy so that he fell. The man was running out of patience. He couldn't wait any longer. Keanu, standing next to him, didn't understand why he was screaming. The commander-in-chief again yelled at everyone around him. He ordered to seize the Holy Land and kill all the Gentiles. The man looked scary. On his eye patch was the sign of Aruga. He said that this was all an order from God, and everything must be destroyed in the name of God. Using his power, he began to hypnotize his army, programming them to kill all non-believers in Arugu. Then, finally, the cooling of the system was completed, and the order to shoot was given, Leon was delighted and ordered the city to be pulverized so that not a trace remained. The divine destruction ray was again directed at the city. The buildings were burning, they were destroyed, but they did not stop. The Bemurians advanced with weapons in their hands and on SUVs. They ran to the city wall, ready to destroy everything in their path. One of the contacts reported that a survivor of the fall of the shell had been found. This man turned out to be Hank. The commander-in-chief became furious. He demanded to incinerate the king. The machine with the divine object began to fire at the city again. The hero came close to the walls of Katla. He leaned his hand against it. He could not allow anyone to destroy it and was determined to take his city back. The guy activated his essence of absorption and added a frog to it, then said a code word and began to absorb the entire city. The believers and minions of Aruga did not understand what was happening. The projectile could not hit the target, since all the buildings except the tower had disappeared. After the hero finished the eating process, he felt that he was a little overwhelmed by what he had absorbed, and he felt indigestion. Michael came down from heaven to look at the disappeared city. Only the tower remained standing in the middle of the former Katla. He admitted that he had seen various enlightenments so far, but this was the first time in his practice that someone had completely swallowed up an entire Earth. But at the same time, Michael was sure that whatever God was, he was not able to deal with this situation, and an angel of strength also appeared. The latter displeasedly examined the consequences of the absorption of the city. Hank, meanwhile, continued to stand in the dust left after the disappearance of the buildings. The army was finally able to enter the city. They fled to the tower. The hero requested his status. He again used the coins to increase his physical strength, durability, and speed as much as possible. He then decided to restore his appearance, and then noticed that the number of religion points had decreased, and assumed that this was due to his inactivity in the last couple of months. He thought that people saw in him a little animal who could easily be eaten and could not feel the strength in him, much less accept him as a new god. So Hank decided to make an impression, and pushing off, he arched high into the sky and then landed straight into the armed crowd, causing a sand explosion. They immediately recognized the guy but were not happy to see him, planning to kill him in order to take everything he had. The hero was not ready to be given to them alive. He used his ability and again used his sharp daggers instead of feet, starting to cut everyone and everyone. The Bemurians, watching from afar, howled in shock at how easily the hero dealt with such a crowd and hoped that he would come to them, and literally at that very second, he was ready to attack them. They immediately knelt before him, begging for mercy. They were ready to surrender, promising that they would not fight, because they were simple standard bearers. Hank was about to raise his leg and almost hit the speaker but changed his mind, but killed everyone around him, taking pity on these two standard bearers. Leon screamed and was indignant. He could not believe how it was that a whole armed crowd could not grab one person. The commander-in-chief ordered to get rid of the hero. They again launched the light cannon, but this time into the crowd in which Hank stood. The guy was surprised that they were doing this, because besides him there are many representatives of the believers of the god Arug, who is fighting against him. The guy began to squint from the bright light that hit right in front of him, but then it didn't hit anyone, since Hannah, who acted as a shield, managed to get to them. Although the girl was still wearing a hat, she felt as before, she was inspired. She asked how long they had been waiting for her and notified that she was ready to start fighting. Hank approached his accomplice. He became curious why she was still wearing the hat. Suddenly she liked it, but Hannah completely forgot to take it off, as she was in a hurry to save the hero. Then the newly created god approached one of the standard bearers. He wanted to find out which side of the attack their leader was on, and promised not to touch them if they told the truth. The man immediately, without thinking, pointed in the direction the guy wanted. He pointed to the mountains closest to the city. The guys went in that direction. But the hero decided that it would be too long to walk, so he took Hannah in his arms and then flew in the indicated direction, leaving behind the surviving warriors. They looked after the flying guys. They doubted that the divine weapon would work on him. Even if they increased the number of soldiers, they believed that in front of them was the divine warrior Hank. The hero and the girl flew to the active stronghold, where the commander-in-chief and his deputy were located, as well as the rest of the army. Leon saw the guys flying up. He began to shout to the soldiers so that they did not stop and continue to shoot at him. As soon as the purple beam reached them, Hannah immediately turned on her yellow-green protective gene and deflected the blow. The combatants raised their weapons. They began to attack the flying hero. Then Hank decided that the time had come to release the deity. His hair turned ash gray. He activated a crazy martial arts dance and killed one of the most physically advanced guards. Then, in addition to the mad dancing, he activated the ability to control the source, sending huge waves of water into the air. The great king remembered the words spoken to him once that the source of divine power is fear of it. No human would willingly believe in such a cruel being, but when they see the miracles that God performs, they have no choice but to bow their heads in recognition of the difference in power. People captivated by miracles gain faith. They retell the story, making legends out of them. Ultimately, by shackling people with fear, God gains power. Hank remembered these words as he saw all the remaining warriors kneel in front of him and now beg for mercy. They claimed that they could not kill them. They recognized him as a true God. His religion points increased every second. They all believed in his divine power. Before he could realize what was happening, Hank was pierced by a new beam. It was Leon. He controlled the new gun and declared that he could not recognize him as the true God. The man shot an arrow at the hero. It hit him in the stomach. He could not believe that such a person as the hero could be a god. But Hannah was already rushing to his aid. She saw that the guards had raised their weapons and began to fire at the guy, piercing every part of him. But the hero still had the strength to resist. He rose into the air, then grabbed the ropes with his hands and said the code word. After being absorbed, all the arrows from his body disappeared, and the wounds healed. The soldiers looked in amazement, but then they pierced him with arrows again. Leon himself shot at him and demanded that the guy calm down, since he could not use his skill. Then he ordered the remaining followers to continue. Then Hank activated his swords instead of the table and instantly cut them all. The commander-in-chief continued to order to shoot without stopping. The man activated the dogma of hell, which caused all the employees to become clouded in their minds. They could no longer be responsible for their actions. Their body did not listen to them. The conditions for activating the entity were met. It allowed control of the body and mind of someone who was bound by a blood contract. Hank still had arrows in his body, but he decided to prevent a possible army attack and struck first. Two military men grabbed the hero from the side. One of them had his finger on the detonator, but he whispered that he did not want to die. Leon continued to scold and shout at his subordinates from the army. He called them scum and demanded that they continue to beat the hero until they themselves died. Suddenly, the believers of Aruga fell at Hank's feet. They recognized him as a god and worshipped him, begging for mercy. The hero's faith points increased again. He raised a storm from the sand. The commander-in-chief did not understand why the guy was still unharmed. But the whole point was that due to the increase in the number of believers, the deity Hank received a unique symbol that raised all his statuses to the limit. He also acquired a unique ability, increased willpower, but the hero was not sure of its necessity. He remembered how Chester told him that he led people to kill God. He didn't have a particular reason. He just wanted to survive, and also incredibly needed strength, because if he was weak, he would die. Hank was well aware that this was not the power of an animal or a god. This was the power of a man. He again appeared before everyone safe and sound, and golden feathers fell on him from heaven. The newly created god decided to speak out to the surviving people. He understood that many were unhappy with the fact that he was a god, although they themselves would not mind being in his place. Hannah stood surrounded by soldiers who began to take off their ammunition and lower their weapons. Hank stood behind Leon. He pointed out to the man that he had no right to become a god. The commander-in-chief pulled out a hidden dagger from his hand and swung at the king. Hank managed to jump away and did not receive any injury. He jumped to the very edge of the ship. Behind him was a creature with wings. It was burning with a bright light. He was irritated by the very thought that Leon thought he had the ability to defeat the guy. He lit up the sky around him with a crimson light. Deputy Keanu looked at the hero. He was stunned that the strongest of the Phenomenal Nine had become a divine warrior before returning. The commander-in-chief screamed with rage. He was going crazy from the mark left by the god Aruga on all his believers. Hank continued. He didn't understand why they all called him a god. During the previous Enlightenment, he killed many and captured other people's territory. He did not consider himself a god. He despised himself and called himself a murderer, but Leon was completely out of control. His body was burning. He was screaming in pain and anger. His flesh was torn. The god Aruga used his body to transfer his being into him. He called on everyone else to sacrifice themselves to become his embodiment. Something huge with giant claws burst out of the ground. Frightening sounds erupted from its mouth, and its teeth were frightening in appearance. The hero immediately recognized the incarnation of the god Aruga in the monster that crawled out. He again had many eyes, and tongues of flame came out of his head. The monster became furious. It shouted that everything belonged to him. He was ready to destroy the hero at any second. Aruga believed that these were his believers and his holy land, and everything that Hank stole from him belonged to him. The hero was a little confused. The great king noticed that compared to the previous incarnation of the god Katla, this time he appeared in a smaller size. He didn't have much difficulty attacking the monster. He cut off his hand with one blow of his foot and a dagger and declared that now he was a god here. He ordered him to disappear, but Aruga did not see the guy as a threat. He believed that someone who had just received divine power should not dare to tell him. There was almost nothing left of Leon's face. Red vessels were coming out of it. He ordered to be afraid of him, since the true god listens to the hero. Both monsters were rampant. They chased Aruga's former believers, devouring them to increase their power, fueling it. Even the deputy commander-in-chief ran away from them, along with the surviving representatives of the army. The deity shouted and urged them to fear him. People were hiding behind Hank. He tried to explain to the monster that fear is the source of faith, and faith is the source of strength. This is the essence of God. The hero wondered out loud whether this meant that as long as there was strength, the rest was unimportant, and received the answer that everything was exactly like that. The guy admitted that such bad and evil creatures made him sick. He was annoyed by injustice and this state of affairs. Hank and Aruga wished each other death. They rushed to attack, fighting furiously. The monster shouted that his body was the sun god, the greatest of the gods. The creature was not going to lose to the guy, especially to such a non-entity like him. Everything around was in waves of fire. The hero struck blows at him. Suddenly, a small, hunched monster with a huge eye and 4 legs crawled out in front of him. Aruga disappeared before his eyes. Remembering the words of the new moon, he repeated them to the deity. Because his strength depended only on the fear of believers, he had no outstanding abilities. Regardless of the number of submissions, he had the lowest rank among the gods, but he was not even able to protect them. The hero was about to crush Aruga with his foot. He shouted that he should not dare to call himself a god after everything that had happened. Suddenly, a young guy in an army uniform ran into the hero from behind. He was holding a detonator and a belt with explosives in his hands, but was immediately hit in the stomach. It was Chloe's acquaintance, bleeding, his whole life flashing before his eyes. He was strongly devoted to the head of the scouts. In a past life, he was a believer of Aruga, but this faith destroyed him. He was used as a rad. He was starving, but the girl brought him bread. She offered him a deal. He would honor her more than God, and then she would help him and save him from certain death. The boy pressed the detonator and the bomb exploded, throwing Hank to the ground, allowing the remaining incarnation of Aruga to escape death. The monster rushed towards its divine cannon. It immediately began to change, and a creature came out again, even larger than the previous one. It was the divine power of the heart of the sun god. The hero turned to the soldiers and advised them to retreat immediately, but they ran away. Although there was nowhere to run, this was not the time to think about enlightenment. The sun god promised that he would kill everyone and everyone, when suddenly Hank shouted for them to stay. Then Hannah stepped in. She asked them to trust them and believe in the power of the divine warrior. The girl urged them to believe in their real god, but there was panic all around. The creature only increased in size. It had many tentacles, and the sun hung above its head. The angels flew in to see the madness going on. They suspected that Aruga was going to destroy the whole world and were thinking about how to stop him. Hank watched the sun, thinking about all the murders he had committed, countless of them. He did it for the sake of survival. He was overcome by doubts that there was no other way than to survive for the light of someone else's deaths. and whether he lived only for the sake of continuing to live. Hannah realized that the hero was showing indecisiveness, that he was in thought, so she decided to cheer him up and shouted to him not to hesitate. The girl cried. She sincerely believed in him and in his strength. She believed that he could do anything and that they must save all these people together. After she called him her god, the guy was embarrassed. He could not imagine that she saw him like that and trusted him so much. Then he decided to turn to her and to all the other people who believed in him. He promised not to let them down. The points of religion kept increasing. The sunlight that illuminates the universe will incinerate everything to the ground. A bright flash of purple light appeared from the sun above the monster's head. Hannah was afraid that the hero would not cope, and therefore urgently activated the green-yellow gene to protect all the innocents, and noticed that from then on the legend about Hank and the creation of the world began. The fighters began to use their best blows. The hero used the salamander trident, and Aruga turned on the division of Armageddon. The narrative returned to the world before the transformation. Right after that crushing defeat of Hank in the ring, he went outside and drank water from the street drinking fountain. Gina approached him. She sympathized with the hero and brought him a towel. The guy admitted that he started training to become stronger, but apparently boxing is not for him. But the girl touched him with her finger and assured him that he was mistaken, since she was sure that his willpower was higher than anyone else's, and asked him not to give up. It turned out that the hero was unconscious, and he imagined this memory. Hannah was sitting next to him. She was very worried about him. Hank himself was surprised that he was alive. He greeted the girl and she sharply pressed him to her chest. The hero's friend cried. She was afraid that he had died, since he showed no signs of life. She was happy when he came to his senses. He had already begun to choke from her tight embrace. Hank began to worry that she would kill him with joy and began to try to get out. Hannah put his hand on her shoulders and helped him stand. Then they walked towards the surviving warriors, who immediately fell to their knees in front of him. Even the deputy commander-in-chief swore allegiance. People wanted to become the king's flock. They swore allegiance to the divine warrior. Hank didn't care about them. He walked past the believers with the help of the girl, but the military assured him that they now belonged to him. He was still very angry at them for trying to kill him recently. He asked if they really wanted to follow him, and if they thought they had the right. Sitting down on the sand, the hero touched the ground with his hand, and using his amulet of the glutton frog, returned all the absorbed buildings to their place. The city was in a ruined state. The newly recognized god stood in front of the gate and invited them to try to get inside. He said that his holy land itself would determine whether they had the right to live there or not. People immediately ran to the Katla fence. They fought furiously and killed each other, trying to grab the opportunity to get inside. One half of the people went into exile for behaving like animals. The other half lay dead on the doorstep. Hank and Hannah were standing next to each other and holding hands. Suddenly, Keanu appeared in front of the gate. He was holding a little boy dressed in uniform on his back. He did not understand why it was wrong to become beasts in order to survive. He tried to explain that people like him did not really want to quarrel. He wondered if Hank wanted to be the kind of god who turned his back on those struggling to live. Hannah could not stand this lie. She screamed that Keanu was lying, since not everyone killed for the sake of survival and he should shut his mouth. The heroes were surrounded by angels descending from heaven. Michael entered into controversy. He argued that since Hank is a god, therefore whatever his will is, it is true. He tore and screamed because of the hero, chaos began in the educational system and demanded that everything be returned as it was intended. Initially, the tests were supervised by the gods of other worlds, through which living beings became stronger and evolved. As was the case during the commandment under the sun, evolution is in all respects a controversial discipline for identifying the strongest. Hank not only killed a god, he himself became one, in fact. From the very beginning of enlightenment in this world, his actions were closest to the divine. Michael also noted that back then, at the very beginning of enlightenment, he could not even look at the entities when he checked the guy's system. They were hidden from him. This special essence can be activated when confronted with a god, and can only be obtained by defeating one of them, and that is why the hero received the seal of a god. Angel got too close to the hero. It was his mistake as Hank sensed an opportunity and punched him in the face. When suddenly Hannah raised her voice, she was not herself. With an animal grin and wild eyes, she grinned at the fact that the angels had suddenly crawled out of their holes. She wondered who made them suck up to the new god, and who allowed them to look in his direction in the first place. The hero's girlfriend had the mark of the deity of Kent on her head. She held her sword at the ready, calling out the names of other gods. She wanted to know who sent them here. Then blue status windows appeared around. A request came from the pantheon of gods to communicate, and Hank could agree or reject it. The goddess of pleasure shouted that she would not give the guy to anyone. She considered herself his owner and was ready to fight against everyone. The hero grabbed her by the clothes and angrily whispered to her to leave him and leave the girl's body. She didn't dare do this anymore. She hinted that he only uses her when it is convenient for her, but he still belongs to her, and she will watch him from above, and asked him to stay strong. She then let go of the girl and disappeared. Michael was writhing in pain, and Hank was looking at the star-strewn sky, and he was curious if the gods were looking at them now. The angel was sure that they were watching from where you couldn't even feel them, and he thought that the hero would enjoy this. The gods stood on a circular platform, in the middle of which a huge globe floated. They watch everything that people do below.